Right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. This is the Corte Madera Town Council meeting of Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. We just returned from a closed session. We have given direction to staff. There's no further report on that. May we please have the roll call?
Councilmember Andrews.
Present.
Councilmember Bailey.
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Here.
Vice Mayor Condon.
Here.
Mayor First.
Here. Thank you. And would you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First up on tonight's agenda is open time for public comment. This is the time we have set aside for members of the public to speak on anything not on tonight's agenda. I see one member of the public coming up here. Thank you, Cindy. You have 3 minutes, and if there's anybody else who would like to speak after Cindy, please line up behind her, and we'll try to keep things moving. Thank you. Oh, yes, and also for those of you that might be new to this, please, when you get up there, state your name and where you live.
All right.
Thanks.
Cindy Winter, Larkspur. Tamalpais Union High School District is meeting right now about their probable bond issue. And I have no position on that right now. I don't know very much about it. But I am concerned about one thing. Are there any transportation elements in the TUSHD master plan? And if not, should there be? Have we any specific idea about whether the proposed Redwood High School improvements will affect local traffic? And are traffic analyses and projections needed? We need specifics of the TUSHD wish list to answer these questions. Besides, it's important to understand whether Lucky Doherty will be affected and how, because the Twin Cities DPW staffs have been studying bike ped improvements there, it seems forever. Recently, I sensed that we might have a chance to be moving closer to a consensus, and now must we abandon those efforts, and for how long? What changes can be expected on the Redwood High School campus? And will they affect bike ped circulation, both on campus and on nearby streets? I hope the town staff will monitor the situation closely and advise TUSHD that the town is a stakeholder if that has not already been done. Although Redwood High School is wholly within Larkspur, the east parking lot entrance is only about 140 feet from the Corte Madera boundary line. And I have a map here for those who are not familiar with said boundary line. I'll make a similar comment at the Larkspur City Council meeting tomorrow night. Both Twin Cities are involved here. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd, would you mind making sure that our public works staff is in communication with the high school? Great, thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Hi.
Good evening. I want to take a moment to comment on something on the forthcoming agenda on the off chance that my wife and children pull me somewhere else in 2 weeks. You may remember me.
I'm sorry, so it's on tonight's agenda?
It's on next. I'm using open comment here to reference it in case I can't show up next in 2 weeks.
Oh, in 2 weeks?
Fair enough?
I'm sorry, is it on tonight's agenda or the future agenda?
It is on the
Okay.
future agenda.
Got it.
And
All
I may
right.
not be able to be here in 2
Fine,
weeks.
but you mind stating your name?
Yeah. Michael Grelnick. We're Corte Madera business owners of the laundromat, and
Got it.
you folks may remember me from the colorful process of closing on that business 2.5 years ago, leaving me pondering an off-point issue, which is, I'm getting older. So we've enjoyed being part of the community. If anybody's taken a look at it, I think you'll find we've improved it, done some good things. And on the coming agenda, you'll be discussing guidance to the town manager on new leases. I want to encourage you, as you look at that, to delineate two separate matters. One is what the long-term vision discussed a few months ago as you did the refi is for what you're going to do on that parcel, and the other is how long it's going to take to get to that point. So as you consider the length of leases, you may authorize the town manager to enter. Please consider that not until the date that you might decide to do things, but until the date that you would make the decision, complete the planning process, get all the reviews, get the approvals, float a bond, and so on. So it could be some time before anything happens to the center, and I request that you give guidance that allows us to get the longest leases possible to continue serving the community here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Cinda Van Leerup, and I am helping to lead the new neighborhood response group, which is forming on Christmas Tree Hill. So we just formed our group, and we just had our first steering committee meeting last week. What we've identified on the Hill as being one of the greatest risks up there, besides earthquake, is fire. And we're really focusing on evacuation routes and helping to get people out of a very congested area as quickly as possible. So as you can imagine, the most important thing is early notification that there's a problem, especially if it's in the middle of the night or if people are not reachable by the Alert Marin notification through text or email. So we've been looking into the best notification system and looking into what already exists and what exists in neighborhoods around us. And so we've found that many of the places around us have operating sirens or alert systems which are tested on a regular basis, anywhere from weekly to monthly basis. So we investigated, what happened with the siren here, which used to go, I think, too regularly, twice a day at one point. But can we reinstate that and get that working so that we also have an alert system? We've discovered that it has fallen into disrepair. And so what we are asking for as members of the steering committee of the Christmas Tree Hill Neighborhood Response Group is to initiate a review of the inoperable emergency alert siren for Twin Cities, with a view to assess the feasibility of repairing, pressing into service, and periodically testing the system. So I'd like to initiate that as a conversation and maybe as a topic for a meeting discussion where we can further investigate that. And so if I could, I still have a minute, if I could just ask maybe who else in the room would be in favor of reinstating the siren? Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Todd, did you get that? Thanks.
Hi, Peter Chase on Montecito. Nobody ever gets up here and talks about parking in this town or on their own street. So I'm here tangentially to tonight's agenda item, and the fact that Montecito has had a parking problem below the current agenda item. And 10 years ago, there used to be a stripe designating one side or the other of the street, no parking, all the way up. And that's not been there, and the no parking signs have just disappeared amorphously over time somehow on one side of the street. So recently there was an event of several hundred cars on that street, and Twin Cities police came out and ticketed my car and everybody else's car up there. But there needs to be a reinstatement of the no parking zone up Montecito below tonight's agenda item area, and I would request that Public Works go back in their records and look what was on the street at some time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Phyllis Metcalf. I appeared before the council in May and at two meetings to speak about the importance of making design decisions that enhance our community and maintain the attributes that brought us here. We not only have expectations for, but should assure we meet the need to have creative, functional design and not settle for the run-of-the-mill architecture we see too often. The planning department staff, The planning commissioners and the town council not only have a right, but an obligation to reject bad and mediocre design. To achieve superior design that is both innovative and integrated into their environment, we need guidelines to be used as a framework when the commission or council looks at projects. The project designs guideline I am presenting to you tonight, and you all have a copy of it, are based on the elements of good design I shared with the council on May 16th and were part of the statement I made to the Planning Commission last week. Peter Chase and I worked this weekend to create subcategories to show specificity under each section. I've also attached the required findings. And that ordinance, you can see, is vague and amorphous at best. There are other words I would use if we weren't on TV. They even address buildings and signs in the same subphrase. They were written in 94 and 99 and then combined, and there have been no changes since. You actually could take a large-sized fish tank you can buy at Petco, stick it down in the middle of a lot, and it would meet those findings. They certainly don't do anything to achieve the superior design that has a direct relationship with our natural landscape. You can see from Dick Spotswood's latest column, and it's on the back side, I attached that for you too. He is once again discussing the mediocre state of architecture in Marin. He specifically makes reference to, quote, the weak building standards, unquote, in Corte Madera, as an excuse, and this is a quote, to rubber stamp mediocrity by those who don't see demanding first-rate architecture as a priority. I mean, we have to live with wind cup. We can't blow it up and make it go away, but we do have an obligation to make sure there aren't any more wind cups or anything that is mediocre. We have a beautiful city or town, and we want to keep it that way. Tonight, I've come before the council to ask to have these project design guidelines that I distributed to you be added to the council's agenda at its next meeting on August 1, and I'd like a statement of support. And Peter joins me in that. May I have another minute so I can just finish explaining what this is?
Wrap
please?
up as quick as you can.
Okay.
Thank you.
The statement would have two purposes. One, to be used for developing a template of design review requirements that will be submitted to the public for input before being submitted to the council for final approval. And two, to encourage using these guidelines as one of the tools used in making planning decisions until final approval of design review requirements takes place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the work you've put into this.
Thank you.
I'd like to give Ms. Metcalf my time, please. My name is Whit Ingram. I live
Everybody,
Are you sure?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
okay, thank you, though.
Peter Chase, as a part of this, I just want to say that the route for getting to these tools is not clear, but we know we have to work on these tools, and that's the point of this, is to create something for us to work with, the town to work with. We're trying to get down that road one way or another. So any support you can help us with would be appreciated, and we'll keep dogging away at this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lucinda Smith, Corte Madera. Excuse me. I too would like to support what Ms. Metcalf has presented to you. Having been in many of those meetings, it's kind of been on the top of my agenda that we make sure we make intelligent decisions about the planning and the building and the application process. I would like to make requests that I think Ms. Metcalf indicated she would like to have this on the August 1 meeting. I just call to your attention that that's also the National Night Out, which the police and fire will be hosting over at the station, and it might be a conflict for people to come to both events.
Thank you.
Michael Harlock, 533 Redwood Avenue. I just want to express thanks for Phyllis and Peter.
Hold on, Michael. I think we lost the microphone. Would you mind taking a look at that?
use this one?
1, 2.
Okay, I think that's better. Just wanted to express my thanks for Peter and particularly Phyllis's efforts on this score. I was a old story planner with the city of Novato in the late 70s, and I know how difficult it is to write design guidelines that have teeth in them. And I think they wisely set up a format of creating a subcommittee or a working committee, and I'm certainly volunteering my time to work on the subject, because without specificity, it becomes, as Phyllis indicated, kind of pablum and not terribly useful. So it's going to take some effort, and it's going to take some focus, and it's going to take some support from the council and the commission. And I endorse the effort, because I think when we come to difficult hearings like the rebuild of the Great Western, we're at a loss in many ways for knowing how to discuss that intelligently. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anybody else from the public who would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to town manager and council reports. Todd, would you like to give the town manager report?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I want to thank the chamber, especially Julie and our staff, for another great 4th of July event. I missed it. I'm sorry. For the first time in 22 years, I was actually in New York on vacation, but I've heard great things about the day, and I just want to thank everybody involved. Wanted to give a couple quick updates on some park and recreation projects that we've been talking about, and a couple of them have been delayed, and I just want to continue to give you an update on those. Our electronic sign has been ordered. The project is actually going to come in $20,000 under budget. That's the good news. We should have the sign installed shortly. The shade structure at Cafe Verde is moving forward. Dave Bracken is overseeing that project. The shade structure within the park, we had some work that we had to do that delayed us on the site plan to get our permit. We have received our permit, and so that construction will start in the next 2 weeks. The skateboard park installation project will begin on August 7th. And so those are the park and rec projects. I wanted to note that Nisha's last day was last Monday. Nisha Patel, our senior engineer. Nisha has meant a lot to our town, and her skill set is very much appreciated, and it'll be difficult to replace. She was responsible for many grants and projects that benefited our town over the years. One of those was her vision working with the BPAC committee and staff on the Tamalpais project. And so I want to say that Tamalpais has been completed. She was a big part of that, and thank her for that. I also want to thank Dave Bracken and the staff, because that project was completed before the 4th of July in the nick of time, and I think it looks outstanding. We have received a couple comments on Nextdoor from community members, very positive comments. I think it's outstanding. Those flashing lights and the improvements to the crosswalks are very much needed and appreciated, and I think it'll improve the safety of our community. But we have received a couple comments, specifically at the Tamalpais at Chapman intersection. There isn't a sign flashing in the median, and there were some comments regarding that. And so staff has looked at that, and we're going to recommend that we add an additional sign at that crosswalk, similar to what we have at Sausalito. But overall, great project, lots of positive comments. We also received a couple concerns of visual obstruction on the south side of Tamalpais at Sausalito. There's a couple parking spaces that are right up against the bulb out, and so people exiting Sausalito looking to the west towards Tamalpais, there's an obstruction there, and so staff went out there. I want to thank Kelly Crow, he's here tonight, evaluated that, and so we're gonna clean that up and clear that obstruction, possibly one spot. But overall, just a great project, and I want to thank everybody involved on that. One of the, I'll just say, a big neighborhood issue. I mean, this has been going on probably for 20 years, and we know the post office has been there since 1970, but one of the things I didn't have a full appreciation of was the impact that the post office has had on our neighbors. And over the last article on this that really came to a point was in 2006. There's a Marin IJ article about it, and really the neighbors surrounding the post office have a big problem. And it starts at 3:30 in the morning and moves on all the way until the early morning hours of delivery trucks on the back side of the post office when they back up and the beeping noise, and it happens all through the night. And so our neighbors have been complaining to the town for years, and so meeting with our new town attorney, we're looking into options and available to us to solve this problem, and we think we have a couple avenues that we are going to research and ultimately report back out to our neighbors and the council. But I wanted to let you know that we are working on it. It is a priority. It's one that I think we can solve. But it's a big issue, and I also want to point out it's just not a neighbor issue. It's one that we had the firefighters in our negotiation talks on Monday, and I asked them about the post office and how it works, because they sleep right on the corner there, and that was one of their number one issues. They didn't think there's anything we could do, but it wakes them up at 3:30 in the morning and keeps them up for the early morning hours. So I think it's something we need to do. So staff is researching that with the town attorney, and we're working closely with our neighbors. And so I will update you, and ultimately, when we formulate our plan, I will bring that back to council with our neighbors with a solution to make sure that you're supportive and in line with our actions. But I did want to bring that to your attention. Lastly, the Tamridge project is coming to a completion. Buildings 2 and 3 have opened. Building 4 is set to hopefully open at the end of this month. We have our first residents in the complex. That was over the weekend. They are starting to move in. A slurry seal will take place this week. You may have seen some work being done on Tamil Vista at Warnham. On the Thursday and Friday this week, the 20th and 21st, they will slurry seal the corner of Tamil Vista and Warnham, and they will stripe it on Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. So I just wanted to make you aware, and we'll send out a next door alert. I believe we've already done that, but we'll send out another one letting the community know. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Council member reports. Jim?
None.
Tom?
Yeah, we had another meeting of the Twin Cities Disaster Preparedness Council. John and Lee Howard have taken over as the liaisons to the neighborhoods and trying to energize and get more neighborhood response groups organized, and they're doing an incredible job. You heard from Cinda tonight at Christmas Tree Hills, doing a fantastic job up there. So that, of course, is been one of our big priorities. But there's also, looks like there's groups starting in Chapman Park, another group starting up in Madrone Canyon and Larkspur, which is another high-risk area. So lots of progress going on there. Just lots of activity and lots of good things.
Great, thank you. Down here, Sloan?
No reports, Madam Mayor, but there's a longtime resident of our town that passed away recently, Andy Vareno, who was a friend of mine and lived across the street. I wonder if you might consider closing the meeting in his honor this evening.
Of course. Thank you. Carla?
Okay. I'll start and move backwards with you saying that. This is the third year that age-friendly Corte Madera will be hosting a party for all of our nonagenarians and centenarians. Those are the residents 90 and over. And we've so enjoyed having Andy as part of this, and he's going to surely be missed. But the party is going to be on August 27th. It is a Sunday from 2:30 to 4:30, and you're all invited. Last year, we honored 23 of our seniors, and all in all, we had 100 guests. So I really do encourage you to come. It's really fun. There's going to be entertainment and hopefully good weather. It's held at the community center, and if you know of anybody that fits into this category of 90 or over, please let me know, because our list is very restricted, and we always feel badly when we don't get everybody. So please let me know, and they will get an invitation in the mail to come. Okay, then working forward, let's see here. Tomorrow, Age Friendly is hosting another third Wednesday speaker series. And the topic is Manage Your Memory. And it's not only a program where they will present little tricks you can do for keeping sharp about things, but also how to spot the difference between just normal forgetting your keys or dementia or Alzheimer's. It will be held at the Central Marin Police Community Room at 250 Doherty, and it's from 1 to 2:30. Everybody's invited. And we've been having a lot of success with these third Wednesday series. No charge and refreshments are served. Then, next Thursday is Corte Madera night with the San Rafael Pacifics. And they will be honoring our town. And the game, or the first pitch, is at 7:05 p.m. on the 27th. Normally the tickets are $15, but if you email pacificsbaseball.com, you get a discount for $10. Your ticket will be $10, and the discount code is, all one word, Corte Madera. So by all means, participate and get out there. There will be free parking at the BioMarin parking lot at the corner of Anderson Drive and Lindaro. And so that's next Thursday, 7:05, and you can get tickets through pacificsbaseball.com. And don't forget your little discount code of Corte Madera. Then lastly, I wanted to make a suggestion, Todd, to you. In the League of California Cities just came out with their publication. The League is made up of all the towns and cities in the state of California. And they had a contest, and presuming they're going to have the same contest next year, I think we should order it, or we should enter it. And they were giving awards for paving projects. And I've got to tell you, our paving project here would have been great competition for what won. So if we could get maybe a really good photograph when there aren't a whole lot of cars, so they can see all the lines and the bicycle stripes and all that sort of thing. And if there's a picture, even if it's just a close-up of torn up pavement, it doesn't have to be all the way up the street, but just how much improvement has been, I think it certainly is worthy of an entry. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you. I think it's worthy of an entry also. Thank you. All right, I've got a few things to report. I attended the or the board meeting for the Transportation Authority of Marin. TAM has released for public comment their draft strategic vision plan. It's available on the TAM website. Comments are due by September 22nd. There is a ton of really great information about what TAM does and what some of the traffic patterns and congestion and funding, transit, all kinds of information. So I highly recommend people take the time to look that up. And if you'd care to make a comment, you have a little over 2 months to get those in. I also attended the Central Marin Sanitation Agency, and I just wanted to mention that CMSA has received the National Association of Clean Water Agencies 12-year Platinum Peak Performance Award.
Wow.
So that's a mouthful. But yes, that is 12 years with no reportable releases of sewage or anything like that. So no blending events. That's a pretty impressive track record. CMSA's facility is the one out on Anderson Drive, just kind of down from the East Sir Francis Drake entry at right there by 580. Finally, I would like to mention that National Night Out, as somebody else had mentioned, is August 1st. Our Central Marin Police Authority is going to have kind of an open house at their station at 250 Doherty from 5 to 8 with food, games, and fun. It's especially great for little kids, but it's fun for the rest of us also. We do have a council meeting that night at 7:30, but if folks want to go to National Night Out, then zip on over here. I'm sure you can get here in time to see most of our council meeting. All right. Moving on to the consent calendar. The purpose of the consent calendar is to group items together which are routine or have been discussed previously and do not require further discussion. They will be approved by a single motion. Any member of the town council, town staff, or the public may request removal of an item for discussion. I actually would like to pull one item, number 5.5, the letter to the California Transportation Commission. Is there anybody who would like to remove any other items for discussion? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve 5.1 through 5.4 and 5.6 through 5.9.
So moved.
Second?
You can figure that one out, Rebecca.
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon.
Yes.
Mayor First.
Yes. Thank you. And Todd, forgive me, I didn't have a chance to even tell you why I'm pulling 5.5. But I wanted to simply mention that lovely Nisha Patel, who was our senior engineer, she gave me the heads up that the requirements for the ATP are very strict and that there are probably a couple other sentences we need to add to the letter. Very basic stuff that was included in the staff report but just simply needs to be put in the letter. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In the staff report, under the final 2017 Active Transportation Program Augmentation Guidelines, on the last page, it mentions that the letter must be addressed to Susan Branson. The page previous to that says that the letter must confirm that the project can be delivered in the time frame proposed and that the project is still fully funded and we need to submit 5 copies, et cetera, et cetera. So when we approve this, hopefully, I just simply want it to be with the proviso that there might be some very minor edits to the letter.
So moved as amended.
Second.
Any public comment?
Oh, sorry.
See none?
So moved.
Thank you.
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon.
Yes.
Mayor First.
Yes. Thank you for that. All right, moving on. Public hearings. Agenda item 6.1, appeal of Planning Commission Resolution 17-011, design review and variance application number PL 2017-0037 DRC and PL 2017-0054 VAR for an addition and remodel of the residence at 141 Crescent Road. Before we hear the staff report, I would like to mention that our town attorney has asked that we each make a statement regarding ex parte communication. I will start, then I'm going to ask each of you to make your own statement. First of all, I wanted to announce that I reached out to both the applicant and the appellant in order to visit their properties to see the story poles and evaluate kind of the lay of the land and what the plans are. My communication with each party was very basic, just about the view and the story poles and the siting. I affirm that I have not prejudged the matter and I am able to make a fair and impartial decision based on the evidence in the record before council. So, Carla.
Okay. I have no personal conflict at all with this. I have not talked to either the appellant or the applicant. However, I did go by both properties and looked at the story poles and saw how the view was affected. And I certainly feel that I can make an impartial decision.
Thank you. Sloan?
I visited the site today, walked around. I've had no ex parte communications. And I feel like I can make an unbiased decision.
Thank you. Bob?
I visited both properties. I met with the appellant and the applicant and had them explain the situation to me. And I do not feel it isn't going to influence me in any way, and I can make a fair and impartial decision.
Thank you. Jim?
Let's see, I visited the property, I met with Mr. Gordon. I was not able to contact the other party. My email was not responded to, but I don't believe I have prejudged the matter, and I can make a fair determination.
Thank you.
Can I
Yes.
say one
Yes,
thing?
madam.
I'd like to just at this point ask our attorney to explain once again to us and to the audience the nature of this hearing, that it is a de novo hearing, and if you could explain what that means.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vice Mayor. This is a proceeding in which you have a hearing from a Planning Commission decision. There's been an appeal. The recommendation of the Planning Commission is just that. It is a recommendation. The council has an independent obligation to make a determination. That determination needs to be made based on the record before you. The record before you includes all of the record of the Planning Commission, as well as any additional information that is provided to you either through a submittal that you may have received, that the full council may have received, that would be provided to the members of the public, or anything submitted to you here today, whether it's an oral presentation or in writing. Again, the determination is that of the council. There is no deference given to the Planning Commission because they came before you. Theirs is a recommendation. You may affirm the decision of the Planning Commission. You may reverse or the decision of the Planning Commission, or you may modify that decision based on your determination and the findings. The findings must be supported by substantial evidence in the record before you. The other option is you may decide to remand the matter back to the Planning Commission for further consideration by the Planning Commission and a subsequent recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Phil?
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the council. Phil Boyle, Senior Planner. Wanted to mention two things that are on your places. One is a packet of materials that was received post-packet or after this Friday. With one exception, there is an item in there which is the certification of the story poles by the project architect, and that is dated May 1st, which is an inaccurate date, so my cover sheet is not completely correct. Just wanted to give you that, make that note. Secondly, you have my PowerPoint presentation in hard copy. Also, both of those items are in the back if there are still copies available. And if not, I can make copies for anybody. So yes, as presented, this is an appeal of the Planning Commission's decision. Back in May, the Planning Commission approved a design review and variance application for 141 Crescent Road. The location of the project, as well as the appellant's location, is shown here. In green is the application location. Thank you. And in blue is 135 Crescent, which is the appellant. This is located on Christmas Tree Hill, just slightly up from Town Hall, currently Redwood Avenue in the center there. Just briefly, the project summary is the floor area ratio existing is 11%, proposed is 37. Lot coverage existing is 15, proposed is 34, so it meets both the floor area ratio and the lot coverage requirements. In terms of setbacks, they are asking for 2 variances. One is for a portion of the parking space and a 5-foot tall fence to encroach over the front property line. So it'll actually go into public right-of-way, but Public Works Department has signed off, and they have no problem approving that. There will be a revocable encroachment permit that the applicant will need to get through the Department of Public Works. This is a fairly common situation in Christmas Tree Hill. The project conforms to all other setbacks. Proposed height, 25 feet, and allowable height is 30. Parking, they will meet the parking requirement and actually improve it by proposing 1 covered space and 2 uncovered. And just briefly, the site plan, the red is the existing structure. The blue is the proposed addition. The purple is the town right-of-way, or the property line, and the green are the 2 areas where the variances are being requested. The green on the left is where the end of the parking space will hang out, and the green in the center is the small fence that they're proposing. The appellant's property is to the left, or the west. Existing and proposed elevations, I'll just quickly go through these. Existing house on the top, proposed street or front elevation on the bottom. Proposed rear elevation. This section here, since we don't have a pointer, this section here is where the appellant's property is located. East elevation, and finally the proposed west elevation. We've received letters of support. The blue is the project location. The green are folks that have submitted letters of support to the town. Staff worked extensively with the applicant and the appellant for 2 to 3 months on this project. The applicant and the appellant met with staff, and we went and looked at the story poles. And the appellant graciously allowed us to go to his residence, and this is looking from his back porch, looking to the east. The story poles are difficult to make out with the photographs, so I have added them in red as best I can. So this is not exact location, but I think it's very close proximity. These are 2 photographs, obviously. One is from the dining room window of the appellant, which is this one here, and this is from the back deck of the appellant, showing the proposed location of the west elevation of the project, which will have the garage, and then below it is the studio space. The lower part of this is the studio space. The upper part here is the proposed garage. I just combined these two. These are 2 photographs. One is the one you just saw on the right, and the other is moving slightly to the left. I'm looking out towards the east. Both these photographs were taken without zooming in or out, just standing at the location. Story poles requirements. The town has story pole requirements. They are part of our design review checklist. They are not codified in the code, and they have developed over time. Staff has exercised their discretion at various times in terms of the certifications that are required, the time of installation, the type of poles, and the type of string or netting. It's been a process that's developed over time, and mainly with input from the Planning Commission. In terms of the story pole installation for 141 Crescent, they were installed in May prior to the Planning Commission meeting as required. As I mentioned, myself and the applicant and the appellant and the applicant's architect met out at the site. We discussed the site, and we discussed the story poles, and we came to the agreement that the architect would provide a letter of certification, which he did, and that's the extra item in your packet that I gave you dated May 1st. Staff at that time believed and concluded that the letter from the applicant's architect met the intent of the story pole requirements. Furthermore, there were no objections from the appellant, the neighbor, or the planning commission regarding the story poles at the May meeting. The story poles were not raised in the appellant's appeal of this application. The story pole issue first came to the attention of the town on yesterday, May 9th. And subsequently, the applicant has gone ahead and had a certification of the story poles done by a licensed surveyor. That's also in your packet. It has quite a lot of information on it, so I've tried to condense that and summarize that in this graphic here. So the green dots are where the story poles were designed to be located. One second. And these 4 story poles are the closest to the appellant. The 2 on your left are the story poles at the roof of the studio. The 2 to the right are the story poles at the top of the garage. In the certification letter, it was determined that these poles aren't 100% accurate. 3 out of 4 of the poles are too high. So they are 3 to 5 inches in height above what they should be, and 1 pole is actually 1 inch too low. The one that's too low is that one here. In terms of the location, overall, the story poles were placed slightly to the southeast from where they should have been located. The poles range from a foot and 10 inches to 6 inches slightly off. And so the best way to describe it, if you take this rectangle that's created by these 4 green dots and shift the whole thing to down and to your right or to the southwest, that's where the actual story poles have been placed. And again, the errors range from a foot and 10 inches to 6 inches off. And I can certainly talk in more detail regarding the surveyor's letter if you have more questions regarding that. There's also some discussion regarding the setback requirements. The setback requirements per our code require that if a property has a slope on the side setback that exceeds 10%, then the project needs to be notched in, what we say notched in, or sort of the wedding cake approach. And what that does, by requiring the addition or the building, even if they're building a brand new building, by requiring them to notch in that upper portion, it minimizes the impact to the neighbor to the left. So this is very similar to the situation we have at hand, except the slope is reversed. So in reality, tilt this way and send the slope that way, and this is the situation. So the applicant has met this requirement by placing the lower portion or the studio below the garage here. This meets the setback, and then the upper portion meets the setback as well. So the application meets this requirement of the town municipal code. In terms of the options for the council, as our town attorney stated, your options are to affirm, reverse, modify, or remand the decision of the Planning Commission per our municipal code. And staff recommendation based upon our ability to make all the design review findings and all the variance findings, as we were able to do with the Planning Commission. And mentioned in the staff report that the Planning Commission did approve this project, 3 in favor, 1 against, and 1 absent, 1 member that is. So based upon those, all the design review findings, the variance findings, and the information and the review of the appellant's statements, staff recommends that you adopt the attached resolution affirming the decision of the Planning Commission. And that concludes my report. I have the findings for both variances and design review, if you like. And of course, the applicant and the appellant have presentations as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. At this point, we will allow council to ask questions of staff. And just to give you all an idea of how it's going to go from here, after we or ask Phil whatever questions we have at this point, I'm going to allow the appellant 10 minutes and then the applicant 10 minutes. And then council will be able to ask questions of the appellant, the applicant, or staff. Then I'll open it up for public comment. Then the applicant will have 5 minutes for a rebuttal. The appellant will have 5 minutes for a rebuttal. Another round of questions, and then I will be closing the public portion of the hearing and bringing it back to council for discussion and deliberation. Okay. So at this point, are there any questions of staff? Carla, I think I saw your hand first, and then I'll go to Sloan, and then I'll come over here.
Okay, Phil, the one thing that I found a little concerning is that, as Ms. Stryker pointed out, it's a de novo hearing, and we're supposed to use, I guess, what we have already, which is public record, and then whatever comes up this evening. I guess what concerned me in guaranteeing a fair hearing, that I questioned why there is in our packet a resolution recommending that we deny the appeal. I think it kind of puts a little bias on the whole process. And I don't know, I don't remember that, us doing that in the past, where we have that. Again, we already saw, the resolution from the first go-around.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps I can ask, our attorney about that.
Sure.
So staff's recommendation is simply a recommendation, much like the Planning Commission's recommendation is only a recommendation. The staff has gone through and is making a recommendation based on the standards that apply to the variance as well as the underlying application. Council is free to reach a different conclusion. Council isn't able to sit here and to create its own findings on the fly, and so these are draft findings as a starting place should you decide to take staff's recommendation. Any of the findings can be modified, they can be eliminated. You can decide you don't like these findings at all and give staff some direction as to different findings. Staff may, depending on how comprehensive those revisions are, may need to come back to you with findings to adopt at a later time. But this is really just a draft starting place, and council is really driving the train here. And so staff has just given you their recommendation and their recommendation of one way to get there, but you are free to tailor these as council, as a body, sees fit. This is not intended to be a fait accompli. This is an independent, there's an obligation on the part of the council to make an independent determination based on the council's findings. And so again, this is just a draft starting place. You don't have to start here. You can start here and go from there.
Okay, thank you. I
would just add,
Yeah.
Also, we typically were sort of forwarding the Planning Commission's recommendation as well in this format to the town council. So in that regard, it's sort of a forwarding on the Planning Commission's recommendation that the council adopted.
Right, and that is, I see that completely. It's just that to get a new resolution presented to us, I think it just gives the perception that it could be a fait accompli, or that we tend to want to go with staff without giving it a fair hearing. Maybe at a later time, if it's okay with you, Diane, that we could maybe just discuss how we, might proceed in the future with that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sloan, did you?
I did. I had one question. Do we still have a remaining issue about this section in the code there, 18.08220 sub B sub 3, There was a question about whether there's a typographical error, for example, and how it should properly be interpreted. Does that remain a contested issue, or has it been resolved?
That was brought up at the Planning Commission, and the staff provided a memorandum, which is in your packet.
I read it.
Explaining that, both explaining the typographical error and also explaining staff's interpretation of it.
I see. So it remains maybe.
Well,
Maybe,
yeah, and
I'd have to, we'll have to see what the
I would,
appellant
I would say
statement is.
I think we're not going to speak for the appellant on this one, but I think one thing that we have added to the record is the original town council resolution number 910, which actually correctly indicates how that ordinance was passed by the town council in 2009. Unfortunately, it looks like what happened was that when it got published, they didn't correctly publish that into the hard copy of the code or the online version, frankly, so.
Okay, thank you.
And that is attachment 3 to the staff report.
Yes, it is.
Thank you. All right,
Thank you.
okay. Jim?
Can you take me through the setback analysis?
Mike?
Can you take me through the setback analysis? Is it between houses, it's 5 feet? You know, I'm thinking Madeira Gardens. And then
Right.
every additional degree of slope,
So this
two-
this particular section of the code regarding just relates to side yard setbacks.
right.
And secondly, it just relates to projects that have slopes in those side yards that are 10% or greater.
Right.
And so the intention, my understanding of the intention is to not have a building looming over a building below. And so the idea is shown here that if you're going to build a structure and it's over 12 feet in height, and the area above that 12 feet needs to be notched in. And so you need to build the building like they've done here on the right, instead of just a box that encompasses here. You need to notch this in. If this was in the flatlands, Madeira Gardens, this wouldn't apply.
Okay.
Does that help? So into the more details, as for every foot you go up, you have to go 6 inches in. So they went up 12 feet, and so they ended up having to go 6 feet in. Or in this situation, that's what they did, or in the code example. In the application, the numbers are a little bit different, but they meet the requirement. Does that help?
Yes.
Any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay. I've got a question about the story poles. So I'm looking at this diagram. And would it be possible to go back to, your illustration with
Green
the
dot.
green, yes, the green
Sure.
dots. So, the dots represent the actual plan location, which on this illustration is a little plus. But the story poles were shifted to the east and to the south.
Correct.
Okay, so the actual location per plan is a little bit more towards the north, the downhill, and a little bit to the west to the neighbor.
Correct.
And according to this, the one on the southwest corner was placed 1.5 feet, a little bit too much to the east. So we're really only talking 1.5 feet that direction is to the plan. And then the pole on the northwest was placed 0.6 feet, a little bit too south. So,
north.
right. So we're not talking a huge difference. I mean, it's like up 1/2 foot approximately and over 1/2 foot for that one pole on the upper left, the green dot.
Correct.
The bottom left green dot would be over less than 2 feet, I mean, down, over 1.5 feet, down a little less than 2 feet. Okay. So I'm reading that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. You all should have this in your.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of hard to puzzle out.
Just wanted to make sure I was looking at that correctly. All right. Any other questions?
No, thank you.
No?
Can I just want
Yes.
clarification too? Actually, just confirmation. I want to make sure I'm reading this right.
Sure.
That same side, the required setback is 5 feet for that side yard setback, minimum, and the current plan is to have it 7 feet 2 inches.
Correct.
11 feet 9 inches on the upper level because of the notchback requirement on the slope. So I'm reading that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Phil. Don't stray too far. We might have some more questions for you. But at this point, I'm going to invite the appellant up and I'll allow you 10 minutes to present what you would like. Hi.
Hi, members of the Corte Madera Council. There was some suggestion by staff at the outset that maybe myself and the architect might have 3 minutes of public time. I don't know if that's what you wanted, or if you want us to try and within this 10 minutes, we will do our best to try, but I was told to ask that question.
Okay, well, I'm allowing you 10 minutes now, and then another 5-minute rebuttal after we have the general public comment. So that's a total of 15 minutes. Is that going to be sufficient?
Very difficult with all these matters popping up, but we will do our absolute best. And
Okay. Is your mic, I'm not sure that we're picking you up on the microphone.
So Elizabeth Breckus Law Partners, and I'm representing the Howards, who are the appellants in this matter. And I just want to start with one point of correction for the staff report. The setback here is not 5 feet, it's 7 feet, because we're in the Christmas overlay district. And so that changes the setback, increases it to 7 feet. And I just wanted to make that one point of correction.
The side yard you're talking
The side
about.
yard.
Okay, thank you.
So then the other issue is this issue about the notch and whether you notch. And some jurisdictions have this notched way of doing it, and some don't. And so I just want to say that the staff report is saying, you know, the code was published inaccurately, but it's also saying that we need to amend it. And I think that the impact of that is that the present code as enacted applies, and it specifically doesn't contemplate this notching back. And I want to say also that, you know, you can amend the code and you can have it however you like, but the present reading of the code doesn't support that interpretation. The other point is that the city application that the applicant filled out has a statement in bold, I think it's even in caps, stating you have to have an engineer or a surveyor certify story poles. And for good reason, because you want to make sure that all the neighbors get fair notice of what's at play here. And this is really significant because the Howards are looking at view corridors, and 6 inches, a foot, it takes away viewpoints that are significant, including, you know, the Richmond Bridge that they've always historically enjoyed and those kind of things. So we don't know how many other neighbors relied on those story poles. And that's a failing that the applicant had, and they can't have their architect do it, and they shouldn't, because guess what? Architects aren't as good as surveyors, so there's a good reason for it. So, you know, then the question was, well, why are we bringing this up now? Why didn't you bring this before? You met on site and everything else. What happened new is, as part of this, and as part of the approval today, you're going to say, yes, you can build a fence to the applicant. Well, guess what? The applicant surveyed the lines and realized the fence was off. And he said, I'm going to reclaim some property on the Howard side that is part of the fence. And the Howards looked at that and said, okay, fair point. Looks like some of our property, Mr. Howard grew up at this property, has always been on my side, but that's fine if you need to reclaim it. What happened between the time of the Planning Commission and today is the neighbor staked where he plans to put up the fence. And then the Howards were able to measure, okay, here's the staking where the fence is going to go, apparently, and here's where the storylines are. And they said, well, that's totally off. And we'd be happy to show you on the PowerPoint that. But essentially, that's how this came to be. And the fact is, this mistake, it's not on the Howards. It was on the applicant. When they filed this and did this and had a surveyor, they should have had the surveyor do this. And, that's how this problem arose. And so one issue is, the applicant is saying, hey, I'm going to put up a fence line and I'm going to do this project. And the question is, well, where are they going to do it? And so it's completely fair to this process, and in fact, it'd be unfair to the process to not at least hit a pause, send it back, make the project be a fair process for neighbors on Christmas Tree Hill that are impacted, and the Howards most greatly because of this side yard issue. Now, my final point is just that this process has been really rough on the Howards. I mean, you'll hear that they weren't able to attend the first meeting, but additionally, the fact is that they were the ones, the applicant submitted plans, and they were the ones that said, hey, there's this additional setback requirement, and that wasn't known and wasn't brought up. So then the project changed because the Howards said it should change. And then this encroachment into the front yard with that is unique to Christmas Tree Hill, where you can kind of go over it, so it gives you an options. The Howards were the ones that pointed that out, and that wasn't known. And so I don't think we should blame the Howards, because they're actually, hopefully, having this project follow at least maybe a disagreement in interpretation of code, but, it has been a tough project on the Howards. And so I appreciate it. I hope they can explain to you how impactful the project is. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lee Howard. I just want to read a note from Janet Howard, who lived at the house for almost 25 years. She's my mother-in-law, and Richard and I have spent many holidays at this house, and we currently occupy the house now. I'm so sorry to learn that your new neighbors seem unwilling to compromise on sharing the spectacular views to the east of your property. When your dad and I moved onto Christmas Tree Hill into the home and now share with your family in 1986, part of the charm and allure were the views and camaraderie of the neighbors. Through the trees from the dining room, we could see the bay, the ferry building, and San Quentin. It was such a nice vista, which we strived to maintain and enjoyed for the 24 years we lived there. Our neighbors to the east, Pete and Andy, did not live there full time, but were very amenable to maintaining harmony and were agreeable to preserving the views and keeping a safe, defensible fire protection border. As such, we never asked them to pay anything, only their permission to clean up and trim those trees, which would preserve the views. We always took that on as our responsibility. Views were and are an important part of property value, as we all know, especially on the hill. Part of the uniqueness of this compact neighborhood is not only the views, but that the neighbors all seem to want to work together. I'm truly hoping your neighbors will be sensitive to this issue and will be willing to compromise as they plan their new home. I love you kids, Janet. And I just want to, right, sorry. Just wanted to show that we had the opportunity to talk to so many neighbors over the course of past several days, a couple weeks, and we just feel overwhelming amount of support for the few things that we've been asking to negotiate about. And this is just a quick map to show you which of those neighbors we talked to and who we have support from. Thank you.
So can I have the, yeah, sure. So we actually went out this weekend and talked to almost all of our neighbors, including ones who had given initially support to the 141 project. When we showed them our material and we presented what we felt was very reasonable requests, they overwhelmingly agreed. You see a few red X's, but primarily, and all the paper that I'm holding with signatures from my neighbors, almost everybody, 15, said yes. A couple actually reversed themselves. Drew, with the equal sign there in blue, directly across from my 135 property, he said, you know, after looking at that, Richard, I think I actually shouldn't have supported. I think I should actually stay neutral on this issue. So we just want to put that out there. So I'm going to, Elizabeth has already presented her points here, but I can illustrate a few things with some illustrations here. I apologize, I'm zooming in quite tightly on a surveyor's drawing, but underlaying this picture, you see the site survey done by DJ Scranton. And in the lower corner, you see a red box. That's what's being enlarged. The red box is where our property lines meet. It's where the new property line is being proposed to move. And it's where a staircase that I have that serves my side yard and a workshop under my garage is. Now, what I want to show you is the blue translucent line is where DJ Scranton showed the property line to be. And if you project it down, do you see where it hits? It hits kind of at the edge of the curve of the staircase. The red line is where the staking is done by the architect who placed the stakes himself, not with a surveyor. I've also just put in a gray line to show, as a point of reference, the edge of a walkway that's not in question here, but it just gives a point of reference. You can see that clearly the red and the blue lines do not overlap right now, right? And we took some photos of this. This is my son Ross. He's helping me here hold the tape measure and hold it in the right places. I've circled, or I've highlighted in red the long section. That's the side yard in question. The first photo from the left, Ross is holding the tape measure at the topmost stake on the site. You can look down the red line and see the other stakes. They're a bit wobbly. They're not quite all straight, but you can see that's generally bisecting all of those stakes, right? Notice his tape measure. If the stair is placed correctly where the site survey shows it is, the curve, the blue line is where the stakes should hit. And we measure that with the tape measure. You can see it for yourself right there. It's 1 foot. These lines are parallel, by the way. This is a photograph with perspective, right? It's receding in the distance, but those are parallel lines going back. Now let's go to the back of the site, where the story pole at the rear of the studio and garage is. My son is holding that tape measure. You can see it's a 7-foot line projecting straight back from the red to the back of that post. I'll say that's a 1x4 post, and this is a 2x4 that goes up approximately 14 feet here, or maybe it's 16 feet, where my son is standing. His lines, his tape measure is holding the outside of those pieces of wood, and it measures 7 feet. This is intended to, I'm sorry,
10 minutes are up. Can you wrap it up?
I actually, I really can't. There's so much to show, but okay.
Just take another 30 seconds to wrap it up, please.
Well, okay. I'm going to go quite quickly here.
Okay.
We're going to see a view similar to what Phil showed, but with a little more detail in it. This is where the site structure for the main building intends to be. This is the studio below a garage. These are windows that intend to be there. You can see that they're looking into my windows. I'm looking into theirs. For privacy, they're offering this fence in that location and that height. What we're asking for, what we're requesting, is to slide the garage forward and studio forward so that they're in line with our garage, out of our horizontal angle of view. And we're asking for the parapet of the square roof to drop down slightly so that we might retain a bit of the vertical angle of view. We think that that is better than that. Whether it's trees or the view beyond the trees, we think that is better than that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, would the applicant like to come up and present 10 minutes?
All right. I am Kevin Gordon. I'm not technically the applicant. My father is. But I will be living in this house. I will be buying it upon completion. My wife and I currently live in Mill Valley in a house that we frankly can't afford at the moment. We're both teachers. She works at Ed McGuire just over the hill in Mill Valley, and I work for the San Francisco Opera's education department. So when we wanted to make this house, we really wanted to make it both for us, obviously, we have a growing family. We have a 17-month-old. And we also wanted to really take in neighbor input and really make something that had the least impact upon the general neighborhood overall as we possibly could. Now, I was planning on kind of going over my appeal letter, or response to the appeal letter today, but I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's come up very suddenly that I'm surprised that none of this was in the application initially, because the line of stakes delineating the property line was done by architect, but it was done at the Howard's request. And, you know, we're not in any way required to do that, so we said, of course, we'll do that. I met with the Howards on 4 occasions. My architect met with him on 2 additional occasions. And we generally felt, our sense was that the main issue that I heard until the 4th meeting was of a large uninterrupted wall, which was in our initial plans because we weren't as initially aware of that side setback additional requirement. And so when we did the final product and we had the story poles up, we figured this is great. We're going to be further away from his property. We're not going to have a 2-story wall. He's going to be pretty happy with this. The Howards are going to be happy with this. Cool. I'm very happy about this. So, and then we also were talking to a lot of the neighbors. What's their main issue? Parking. So we retained all the parking on site and added beyond our necessary 2 off-street parking. We would have liked to have a 2-story garage, and we would have liked to have applied to a variance for that, but we figured the Howards were already against a 2-story wall. And so we said, okay, we're going to balance those needs. We would have liked to have both those cars completely off the street. As it is now, this stretch of road is quite difficult, and what we've heard from our various neighbors is that this is an issue. This is a significant issue. And I want to point out this picture right here that, and I have a couple of these that show the road width at our, right in front of our garage, and where their garage will be. You see, the garbage trucks get stuck there on a not weekly basis, but very regularly, and this is something we've heard from several different neighbors that brought up at the Planning Commission hearing. So, and you can see right here, that's a very difficult spot to get into. That black Toyota, its window, side mirror is right up against that foundation, or the retaining wall. Then that is the car parked in the spot where the Howard's request is to move the garage forward. That's where our cars would be parked, right there. We would much prefer to not have to take advantage of the Christmas Tree Hill's ability to let us do things slightly differently than in other areas where, yes, a lot of cars park here, but if we can make the street better, we'd rather have the cars back there. From the standpoint, we've discussed this with the Howards repeatedly, it really disrupts to move that garage forward, really disrupts the design, the entry into the house, the general layout of the great room that we have in there, and it also would require significant excavation, about 58 yards of off-haul and about $12,000 worth of extra cost. And to our understanding, from everyone we talked to, would be opposed by everyone that we had talked to in the neighborhood. And those letters of appeal, I have 4 signed letters of appeal from the neighbors that we most affected by this. And we tried to talk to a lot of different people, and the people that I think were most to be affected by this have stated their support for our project. So there's the issue of our architect laying out the story poles. I think, one, we have to take into account that Richard has an architectural background, and for us, yeah, we should have had the surveyor do it. We missed that part of the thing. In our discussions, we all missed that part of the equation. In our meeting with Richard Howard, my architect, Alex Riley, and myself, he seemed satisfied by that. I'm surprised that this has come up yesterday. So to me, that's a big surprise. If this had been an issue, we would have been happy to figure this out. We even had a surveyor out there today on a day's notice to find out how accurate that was. So a lot of these things that came up tonight are very surprising, and I wish they were in the appeal packet, and I wish they'd come up before the commission, because those lines were staked. The story poles were up before the commission, and I didn't hear any of these issues. So along with that issue of actually, can we go through these pictures? Oh, I can do that. Very nice. So just a slightly different angle here. But again, here's where the cars would be parked in if the Howard's requests were adopted. Ours keeps them off the paved width. And we'll be using our garage too, so technically there'll probably only be one car there. And then here's just everyone. But you can really see that it's tough to get in and out of. And I'm trying to imagine turning into this parking spot from coming down the street either direction, trying to get into that parking spot where the rear of the car has to be just a little inside of that. That seems very difficult to me, along with everything else, and people coming across and the rear right there. That seems very difficult to me. And here's just another clearer view that our driveway would be about here. This public parking space we're moving into this location. I mean, as you can see in general, this is a very difficult spot to get in and out of. The Howards, on the other hand, there's a driveway coming down. You can see out here, this is the Howards residence, 135. There's actually a driveway on the other side, so it's not very hard for them to get in and out of those parking spots, which they regularly use. So, to me, what I heard loud and clear from my talks with the Howards repeatedly, and I want to talk to them from the very beginning, learning that the fence was, that the survey showed that their fence was on our property. I wanted to create an open dialogue from the very beginning. So I said, what is the main issue here? And I kept hearing a large wall looking at us. So we addressed that, and that's where I'm just very confused by this. And just to go quickly through a couple other elements, when we have the studio window is an issue, and his was called to question about what the size and that it'd be patterned. It was a patterned glass window, and we did that to articulate that wall at his request, that he was concerned about an unarticulated wall, which when we were initially sketching, it was unarticulated because it was an initial sketch. There's the words. And I think that he also, if the setback is moved, and we really feel like we've been with planning on this the entire time, that we've been talking to staff, we've been using their reading of the code, and Planning Commission agreed on that. So we feel like we're totally within, we're not trying to do anything special. We feel like we're totally within our rights to build exactly where we are. And we thought that would be a good solution anyway. So I think that generally speaking, we really love Alex Riley's design. We feel like it really fits what we're looking for in a house, but we think it will be a minimal impact because when I see this view, I have not seen any evidence of an actual view. There's extra trees beyond the trees on our property, and also if this was me, just like our downslope neighbor mentioned, at the edge of our property on the driveway, there's our current driveway goes into the property directly below us, a minor amount. And she said to the record, she said to city, this concerns me. I believe part of the driveway is on our property. And so when she said that, and we had the survey, and we contacted her and said, this is true. Do you have any problem with us, if you want that land, how do we work this out? And she said, no big deal. I just wanted to make sure that was the case. So if I'm worried about a view, and that's my primary concern, when that house is being sold, or just before that, I tell city, I'm concerned about this view that I previously enjoyed. And I would have also liked to have heard about that from the beginning, because I want to work with all my neighbors. They're going to be my next door neighbors. This is not, I'm hoping to live there for a very long time. I'm not trying to make anyone mad, and I talked to as many neighbors as I could, and my dad helped me out. He talked to a lot of different people as well, and we worked out any issues that we had with any neighbors. We had a downslope neighbor who was worried about his privacy. We said, sure, how about if we put up a privacy fence? This is Mark Rudy, directly below us on Redwood Avenue. And he said, sure. He was worried about the slope, making sure that the slope doesn't, it's a very steep slope. So
That's your 10
I'm almost
minutes,
done. Anyway,
30 seconds, wrap it up.
So my apologies. I actually meant to be a little briefer than this, but yeah, so my feeling is that the Howard's requests are unnecessary, overly expensive, and more impactful when compared to the approved design. That the benefit would be to one person rather than the community and ourselves. So we've tried to work with them, and I'm really sad that this is where it's gone to. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I would like to open up for council questions of either staff, the appellant, or the applicant. Sloan?
I've got questions. Can the appellant, can I ask either one first? Sure, okay.
Sure, yeah.
Can you imagine a scenario where you could reach a compromise position if you had more time?
Yes.
And what generally would that be?
I think that we could find a place where, so we have retained Michael Harlock, the well-known architect on
Yes.
the Hill. He's actually produced some variations of plans as explorations. And had we had the opportunity to actually meet and talk about these things, we think that there's variations that would accommodate their design need and also salvage a bit of the view that we enjoy. And can I just say, it's not just view potentially through the trees, it's of trees. Their plan requires two, a double-trunked, one large oak to be taken. And our scheme actually retains that oak, which is a more desirable view than a large stucco building.
Okay. And what do you think about the parking issues that the applicant were just talking
So in
about?
my 5-minute period, I intend to show you drawings that Michael
Oh, I'm sorry, I
helped.
forgot that we had that. Am I doing this too quick? Should we
No,
wait?
no, this is a time for questions.
I can
and
show you
then-
now if you prefer.
Well,
You can go ahead and do it when you do it. If you could answer just generally.
Oh,
what-
no, we actually demonstrate that the parking is not impacted. Today, everybody agrees. Kevin is right. That's a pinch point where he showed the trash truck. I'm the one who hears them every Monday morning honking their horn to get through. We show that even by moving the structure forward as we propose, that pinch point, which is currently 13 feet, is now 16.6. It's actually the widest spot in the road with our change. It's no longer a pinch point at all in the road. There's other ones elsewhere, but I think we could reach a point of agreement if we had some more time.
do you mind if I ask a
Of course.
follow-up to that?
Yeah.
So does your plan allow for a one-car garage, 2 cars in the driveway, and the shifting of the public
Yes.
parking
Yes.
space?
I'll show that. Yes.
Any other questions?
When we finish with, if anybody have other questions, I'd like to ask Attorney Breckus a question.
Okay, any questions for the appellant at this point?
I have a question. Where are you losing your bay views?
So we have one eastern-facing window from our entire living area. These are hillside homes, reverse plan, living level up, bedrooms down. The bedrooms don't enjoy a view out anywhere. They look
Right.
into our creek bed and deck, which is our rear yard. We have one eastern-facing window. It's the dining room window, and it's visible from our living area, dining area, and a bit from the kitchen as well. So it's that window that we're talking about.
Okay, and right now that's encroaching on your view.
A portion of it, about half of our view is taken by the proposed structure location, and our plan captures back much of that.
Okay, because you're probably aware of it, but in our general plan, your view is protected insofar as the trees go,
Yes.
the height of the trees.
Yes.
That if
It's
there
a
was
separate-
that view,
Thank you for that. I know, and it's a separate process. I don't wish to take time of this appeal on the tree issue, but I do understand that section of ordinance, yes.
okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I had a
How about over
question.
here, Bob?
Yes, I understood the issue about the placement of the story poles, but with the actual lot line, and I didn't quite know where you were going. Are you questioning the placement of the lot line
Yes,
as well?
so essentially, the lot line has
Where you were
not
go-
been.
I didn't quite get where you were going with the steps and saying
I'm
the
sorry.
outline went into the steps.
It was
So-
rushed, and I know it's a hard illustration to interpret. What we're saying is that the lot line has not been certified. And in fact, given the evidence of the professional surveyor's documents, it looks like where the poles have been pounded into the ground, indicating the fence and lot line, they appear to be off by over a foot to us. And if they're off by a foot, that is no doubt how Alex, the architect, decided, took a measurement from to determine where the story poles began. So we believe the story poles and the fence line are in question right now. Until certified, we don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd like to ask a follow-up, maybe of staff. When this surveyor went out, he looked at the story poles, right? He did not make any determination about where the fence markings were, which have been represented to be quote-unquote the lot line,
I'll switch with you, Phil. Yeah.
correct?
So I'll try to bring up the, so just to clarify, the original application that went before the Planning Commission included a survey by a licensed surveyor. That is what the town requires, and that met the requirements of the town, because again, it was a survey by a licensed surveyor, signed and stamped by them. Mr. Howard,
Sorry, when was that?
when was that? That was submitted with the Planning Commission application, so I want to say April.
Got it.
In March or April. Mr. Howard references that it was not certified. I don't think that's the correct term. I think the term he's looking for is that it has not been recorded by the county. And so the county has not received that document and recorded it, which I believe they will do, or they, they can do when that procedure moves forward. But the town staff has no indication, no evidence that the survey is incorrect.
Can I ask a question?
There does seem to be a dispute between the neighbors of where the fence line is located in relation to the property line, but staff has no indication, again, that the survey is incorrect.
Okay, so far you've got 4 questions lined up. Would you mind just, before we all start spouting off our questions,
Yeah.
say that again, but elaborate on some of the dates, because this was apparently dated today, received today.
Yeah.
So,
We're talking two different things.
right.
Let me bring
and
it up
I'd like
here.
to find out again what the town requires. Does the town require it to be actually filed with the county, or just simply done by a licensed surveyor?
Hang on one second. Maybe, Alex, you know the sheet of your survey? Excuse me? The sheet of the survey, is that number 1?
No, it's going to be sheet 2, possibly.
Thank you.
As part of this?
So we're talking two different things in terms of this survey. Okay, so this is so this is the survey that was submitted back in for the Planning Commission packet. This is signed and stamped by the licensed surveyor, and it indicates the property lines located. And so that is one document that has not been disputed through the process. The second document, which was actually done by this same surveyor, is the item that came before us today, and that is the recordation or the certification of the story poles. So this gentleman did 2 things. He did this map, and he did the story pole clarification. Is that any other questions?
Well,
Does that help?
first I saw Bob, then I saw Carla, then I saw Jim. So
Mhm.
Bob?
So, in answer to Mike, the question I had previously, I understand we believe the survey is valid, but the appellant is saying that the actual placing of the stakes showing where the survey lines are is not valid. So, what's staff's take on that? Do we certify that? Do we know that? Was that part of the process today?
No, we do not certify that the stakes that are put out by the architect meet the requirements of the survey. However, if this project is approved, one of our conditions of approval is that the staking must be certified by a licensed surveyor, and the town will go out there and check those. So the town will check locations of the building in terms of setback. The town will also check the height of the building. So that's a standard condition of approval.
Thank you.
Carla?
Okay, yeah, I think it's putting the cart before the horse, isn't it? I mean, it's always been, to my knowledge, that you have the property surveyed. I understand you don't necessarily have to have it recorded, but you have it surveyed, you have the survey stamped, and then the surveyor goes back and checks the poles, the story poles, to make sure that they do correspond to the property lines. But to say that everything gets approved and then they'll go back and check, that doesn't quite make sense to me.
So there was the multi-step process. Was the survey was done by the surveyor. The architect installed the story poles, and then the surveyor went out today, I'm sorry, and certified their location, and that's the document in front of you.
and that the location is incorrect.
There are some errors in the location and the height, as I mentioned in my staff report.
Well, in our regular practices, wouldn't they have to be adjusted and moved to depict the actual property lines?
I think I'm going to, Adam, you look like you were maybe going to answer that one. But can I also mention that the council can choose to require that the story poles be shifted into their correct location, and we can continue this until we've had time to review those. This issue came up with another appeal, you recall, and that's what we did. But at that point, those story poles had actually come down, and we didn't, story poles weren't up for everybody to view. These story poles are there, and we have a very specific diagram of just how they're slightly off. It's all laid out here, so, the council can decide to shift them if we want, or we can simply take into consideration the information that we have here in addition to what we viewed from the story pole. That being said,
That was
Adam,
it. No,
was there
I think
anything
you,
else
I
wanted
think
to
you
add?
just explained it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Not yet.
All right. Jim?
When surveys are done, isn't it customary to have wooden stakes periodically along the boundary line so you can look and see where the property line is? Because I couldn't see them when I was out there on Sunday. All I saw was some stakes put up by the architect.
It's not my recollection that surveys always include staking of the property. And again, there's a possibility that these were, we could ask the applicant, there's a possibility that these were staked back when the survey was done many months ago, and those stakes have moved. But is not my understanding that it's always, that the properties are always staked when they're surveyed.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions of Phil?
No.
Okay. Any other questions of the applicant or the appellant?
Yes.
Sloan?
Ms. Breckus, would you mind, just real quick? Elizabeth, it's your argument that even if there's a typographical error, the fact is the code reads a certain way and we're obliged to follow it. Is that right?
Well, that's not my
Oh.
entirety of my argument. I would just preach to the language of the code. Read it, tell me what you think. I think it's susceptible to our interpretation, clearly. And what I found very interesting is.
I don't think your mic's on, by the way. I don't either.
I can talk about it. So that's not really our argument because you heard me, right? But it's basically, it's the, read the code section and it really says what I think it says. And I'm quite confident that that's the case. And it is true that other jurisdictions do it differently. But one thing that's kind of interesting is this application was submitted with a tall face building, both stories right on top of each other. And staff accepted it and said it was acceptable. That's my understanding. Now, I wasn't personally there for any of this, so I'm just repeating. And then my client said, hey, I think you guys are missing something because of this code section. And at that point, staff looked at it and there was some question, well, what does this mean? And then they said it means this tiered interpretation. So the impression that the Howards have is not that staff had just an enormous experience with this and, oh, yes, we always do it like this. It was, that's an interesting provision in the code. What do we think it means? And then they said, we believe it means this, and the applicant changed the process. I'm just saying, it to me, I read the code. I think you can read it yourself. Even if it didn't reference this different figure, I think that the reading of the code is clear, and then I think the figure seems to support it as well. So, I mean, that's how I interpret it.
What do you think about the presentation of the historical record that shows the diagrams flip-flop like that?
Well, here's the thing. If the city wants to convince us that it's correct, well then please show us all the tiering, the prior projects that you have approved where you have applied this standard, right? That must exist. Either you have said the setback has to be increased between two buildings, and here's how we've done it all these years, or since 2009, or we've required tiered, and here's those projects. And so if we had that, I think we would have a higher degree of confidence that, in fact, this code section that was amended then was consistently applied in the way that we understand it.
No, that's a different thing, though. The question is whether it's a fair interpretation when you look at the historical record that the diagrams were just flip-flopped.
Perhaps, but then you still would look at the code section language and say, what does that mean? And I think that it's still supported by our analysis.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I wouldn't mind talking to the applicant. Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Excuse me, through the mayor, I just wanted to speak to this point of
Yes.
the code section. There was some suggestion earlier that staff has made, the suggestion in the staff report that the code would need to be amended in order to conform it to the sort of tiered
Yes.
theory that was presented by staff. That's actually not the case, and that the recommendation of staff is not that there needs to be any additional legislation. In fact, the staff report has provided to you what the legislation that was adopted by the council was. The error that occurred was not in that legislation. Rather, it was a publishing error by the company that publishes the online version and the printed version of the city's code. And so you have already adopted the appropriate legislation in order to achieve this result, and staff is now interpreting it as such. The unfortunate error is that the publisher made an error in how it publishes the code, and so what needs to be corrected is the republishing by the publisher of the city's code.
And this is on the online version of the town's municipal code.
And as I understand it, the same publisher prints a copy that can be provided to someone who wants a printed version. So that error exists in both the online version, as I'm understanding, as well as the printed version. But this is not an amendment situation. The legislation has been properly adopted. The error is a publisher's error. And city staff is pursuing having the publisher make that correction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Can you imagine a circumstance where there's a compromise position here?
I honestly, we tried when, I didn't really say this, I was trying to be quick. When we initially went and met with them and they requested that we move the garage, which happened at the very beginning, we really tried to find ways that wouldn't require a ton of excavation, a ton of extra money, and that from what we understood from talking to the most affected neighbors would not be a problem, and we weren't able to do that with finding the staircases, making that work on the design front. I think if you're talking about a purely design format, like I had my architect look at this for a significant amount of time, and I can maybe have him come up and respond to exactly how the design element of it would work. But our understanding was in general that the most neighbors would be opposed to moving the garage in towards the street, and that it would also negatively affect our design. So that's kind of how I wanted to come up with a compromise early on, but it was just we couldn't find a way of doing that that wouldn't upset more neighbors. So it both negatively affected us and upset more neighbors than one. So we had at least 3-4 people tell us that they didn't want that garage moved. So I'm always happy to come up with a compromise, and I've done so with other neighbors, and it's just a matter of doing that without making a bunch of other people oppose us and working for the greatest general good of those most affected by our project. We wanted to minimize that impact on the most people possible, and I think we did that. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carla, any other questions?
No.
Okay. Bob?
Nope.
Jim?
No.
Okay. Then, is it okay if I just kind of ask about the story polls? Because if we're potentially going to have an issue with the story polls, and we might conceivably put this off for another meeting so that the story poll locations can be corrected, can I take a straw poll right now and determine if that's an issue?
Yes, you can take a straw poll. You would still need to take public comment, but you could make a request to the public that they confine, if it seems that the desire of the council is to continue it, to confine their comments to the story poll issue, because there will be another public hearing. But if someone insists, they would need to be able to respond to the full matter.
Okay. Can I take a straw poll about whether or not folks feel strongly that they might want to consider having the story poll locations corrected?
It makes sense to me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and I'd like to see flags along the property line.
I'm sorry, Jim, I couldn't hear that.
I'd like to know where the property line is.
I see.
Okay, I flags might not be the whatever.
Wouldn't stakes with little
ribbons or-
Certify that the property line is properly marked, or have it corrected so
Right.
that it is.
Okay.
So that we
So
make sure that we have
staked
an
or
accurate
marked.
reflection of where the property line is, and then where the building is relative to the property line.
Correct.
Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so, once again, I'm going to open it to public comment, and you want the public to weigh in on this particular issue, or how do you want me to handle this again?
Well, the discretion is the mayor's, but if the mayor's preference is to have public comment be generally about the story poll issue, you can make that request to the public. However, there may be a member of the public who is here who may not be able to attend on the next meeting, and so you would need to permit public comment on the full item. But you can make the request.
Got it. I think you heard that there's pretty strong sentiment among the council members that we would like to see the story polls adjusted so that they represent precisely the true locations and elevations. Further, we want the property line to be marked so that we can see exactly where everything is. So I am going to open it up for public comment. Recognize that is likely the way this council is going to vote to require those adjustments, and then we will bring this back at a future meeting for a full public hearing on the project. Whoever wants to speak, line up behind the podium, please. State your name, where you live. I'm going to allow 3 minutes per person. After public comment, I'm going to allow the applicant 5 minutes, and then the appellant 5 minutes. A last chance for any final questions by council, in which case I'll close the public portion of the hearing, and we will have council discussion and deliberation.
I want to just remind you that if you probably don't want to close the public portion until you make a determination about whether you're going to continue. So I would recommend that after the rebuttal arguments, that you decide what you're going to do with respect to that, so you know whether you're continuing the public comment to the public hearing to a future date or not. And I just want to be clear, we are not, while members of the public can decide whether or not they want to get up to give public comment on the item beyond just the story polls, and so it's really just a request, but certainly there is a right to public comment, and so if there are members of the public who want to make fuller comment, they are certainly entitled to do so this evening.
Of course, thank you. Okay. 3 minutes, state your name and where you live, please.
Michael Harlock, 533 Redwood Avenue. I'll try to confine it to 2 basic points. I need to say that although I am on the Hill Dwellers Design Review Committee, I am not representing the Hill Dwellers in my comments. I live on the Hill, and I'm speaking as a resident of the Hill. 2 points I want to put to you as a question put to you. You're probably wondering why so many neighbors changed their mind. And that's because we did the research to rebut what Kevin said, is that moving the garage forward would be a problem for the neighbors because it would further narrow the right-of-way. This is not true. The owner will amply demonstrate this in the exhibits in his rebuttal. We have spent a lot of time analyzing the fact that you can put two apron parking spaces and they will have nothing to do with the actual moving lane. The bugaboo of the garbage truck will be unaffected. In fact, the situation will improve with either the applicant's proposal or what we're suggesting. And the second point, because I only have 3 minutes, is speaking as an architect, I have no intention of upsetting the basic design thrust of that. I think it's inappropriate for me to do so. But I do notice the violation of the Christmas Tree Hill design guidelines in that we have in the addition an absolutely uninterrupted front wall of this house. You can see the existing cottage is quite articulated, and we have basically a simple rectangle. So bringing the garage out would, in my opinion, professional opinion as an architect, it not only works from the point of view of the proponent. We've done studies to show that it would actually improve that end of the house without changing their basic plan. But it would be a more attuned to the Christmas Tree Hill Dwellers design guidelines to have the garage come out, creating kind of a courtyard plan, which is certainly appropriate to the Mission colonial style and which they've faithfully represented. So beyond that, I just want to emphasize the applicants have made one change to the design, and that was only in response to hearing the setback requirement as staff interprets it. I have never heard this side yard requirement interpreted in this way. There's no language that talks about stepping back. There's no language in your current ordinance about tiers, but
Michael, the 3 minutes is up. You mind
okay.
wrapping it up, please?
Just that the only change that I have seen from this applicant, even given the alternatives that we've produced, is to make the change in the setback that was required of them.
Michael, hang on a second. Would you mind, Mayor, first if I ask him a question?
Sure.
Michael, can you explain that second point you were making about the Hill Dwellers Code has some? I didn't follow.
The first.
No, not about that. You said there was like the garage. Yes, the design guide. Yeah.
I'm about to read from the
somebody put something on a
Christmas
slide on
Tree
that I
Hill design guidelines.
Okay.
Building form structures should be designed to minimize mass and bulk. Building form should be articulated. Large, unbroken expanses of wall should be avoided.
And in your view, that the design fails to comply with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
But if you go to the one where
Phil.
you're showing the front elevation.
Front elevation.
Well, I think the plan shows it pretty clearly.
Yeah, I know, but we want to look at it.
That. No, that's the back. That.
This is all one plane. This is all one plane all the way across.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Hornstein. I live at 119 Crescent Road, so we're on the other side of the Howards, so 2 houses down from the property in question. Just a couple of quick things. So just in support of the Howards, I mean, I've been, visiting them and visiting even his dad before that. And it does appear to me certainly that it's going to severely impact their view and their light and their privacy the way the plan is now.
As far as the parking goes, that's not right in front of my house, but I drive past that several times a day. I have no concern looking at what they're suggesting as far as moving the parking out or moving the garage out, that's going to have a negative impact. And then the last thing, so this at least touches on the story poles. So we saw the story poles go up, and we could certainly see them and, see the flags and all of that. But they were like behind a tree, right? So we could certainly visualize, where the structure would be. What we didn't learn until this weekend was that actually their plan calls for cutting down the main tree that would be blocking our view of, well, basically, it would be taking away our green view, and we would have kind of a dead-on view of their addition. So I don't know if that was in like the flyer that went out by the city, and it was somehow called out that tree was going down or not. But it really was just this weekend when we actually walked the property that we noticed that. That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Marcel Perry, and my husband and I reside on 148 Crescent Road, so we're directly across the street from this. And our biggest concern is obviously the parking, because we are definitely impacted by the service trucks that go through the area, and the orientation of how the cars will be moved. We see how that's going to be done, and quite honestly, I do support what they're going to be doing with the house. One of the challenges that we have currently, and it's just one of the things that we have to accept about where we live on the hill, is because of living in an elevation where we are, or we have a steep driveway. So for us to get out of our driveway, and with the, I don't know if there's a picture that shows the street a little bit. But anyways, in order for us to get out of our driveway, and with the way that the street parking is, we have to, every once in a while, if we have two cars in our driveway, sometimes we have to back in and out a couple times in order to get around a car if it's parked in the lines. And if it's parked anywhere outside of those lines, it's definitely a little more challenging. And that's just the nature of living on the hill. Now, where our concern is moving the driveway further out into the street. There's the street parking, where I don't know how that's going to work there, but everything is moved in front of basically our home and the home next to us. All the parking's moved out in that direction. It's not in front of where the Howard's house is. They have an open driveway across the street from them, as well as a garage in front of them. So it's very open for them to come in and out of their driveway. So that is a concern. There's also, if we look at the parking on our street, it's not just, we have to take in consideration, there's a lot of houses that's in our neighborhood that do not have street parking. We have two houses on Hill Path. They do not have street parking at all, or they don't have off-street parking. They have to actually park on the street. There's no other option for them. Then there's a number of houses that are in the neighborhood that have more than one car, more than two cars, lots of them have three cars. So we have, in the actual area, we have a number of residents that park on the street. So if you're getting into our area late in the evening, there's oftentimes no place to park on our street. So quite honestly, we have the privilege when we built our house to have a two-car garage, so we actually can get two cars off the street into a garage and two cars into the driveway. One of the things that we had to do when we built, and it was a concession that we were happy to do, was to accommodate some of the concerns of our neighbor when we were building, was to actually lower our garage, which was happy to do, but it was an unintended consequence that one of the cars that we have is too high to park into our driveway. So as a result, one of our cars has to be parked in our driveway or on the street. And so one of my concerns is by moving the garage and the parking further out, it leaves no room for error. It gives no relief valve to the rest of the neighborhood. Okay, but that's my point, is it doesn't give any relief valve to the rest of the neighborhood.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Yes. Into the microphone, please.
You're an architect, so can't that you're not public.
Oh, who cares?
Well,
Move into the
okay,
rebuttal.
you'll have 5 minutes for rebuttal, so That would probably be the best time. Any other member of the public who'd like to speak?
My name's Linda Meyer, and I live on 124 Hill Path, and I'm one of the people that has no driveway and no parking other than on Crescent. And my concern is with neither neighbor. My concern is with the road and having no parking, because people from Redwood that also don't have any parking on the street also park on Crescent, plus those of us that are on Hill Path park on Crescent. And there are at least three families in the neighborhood that have 3 cars, so at least one of them is on the road as well. And my daughter dances, and so we never get home until late at night, and so we're the ones that are parking in some spot other than within those white lines. And often those white lines are so tight because there's some erosion on the yard side of many of the lots, and so you can't really park within those lines, or the retaining walls are, I guess, in the parking spot a little, so it's a very tight parking spot for some of the bigger cars. We don't have a particularly big car, but it's very tight parking, and I have scrapes on my car to prove it, because I do try to get within the white line. So in any consideration, I would say at the Planning Commission meeting, there was a very quick mention of the Public Works people going out and approving the reset of the parking. And I would say that that's an extremely tight spot, and that the Public Works needs to go out there with the fire truck and see if the fire truck can get through there, because the garbage truck barely gets through there and usually has to honk.
Okay, thank you. Any other member of the public like to speak? All right, seeing none, let's move on. Okay, first let's have the applicant for 5 minutes, and then we will have the appellant for 5 minutes. Then we'll have the opportunity for final questions. All right.
So, first off, I'd just like to point out there's been a lot of new issues brought up today that have generally been on topics that have been, or, you know, specifically the story polls and the lot line that had been, those story polls have been there since our hearing on May 9th, I believe. Since before then, there was no issue raised at any point until yesterday. We would have been happy to go restake those if we had had time to do so. I actually flew in from Michigan, visiting my in-laws last night. I'm not asking for pity on this, but I really wanted to make this hearing. And I'm flying out again tomorrow morning first thing, because I really wanted to make this meeting, and I wanted to make it happen. I wanted to have this made right now. I don't think I also want to point out that those story polls, along with having been there for months now, and having had no issues raised in the Planning Commission or the appeal, now it's being raised the day before, giving us no chance to do anything about it other than to find out that they're a little bit off. To me, that's not fair. And it's also immaterial to any of the items that were listed in the appeal. They were done based on our drawings and on Marin Maps, I believe, and Google Maps. They were not based on our story pole location in any way, shape, or form, to my understanding from reading them. And I'm no expert. I'm a musician. I don't know any of this stuff. But from my understanding, also our community outreach has been regular for months. Most of what I'm hearing happened this weekend from a lot of the neighbors. So we have not, and we've been generally trying to meet with the neighbors most affected, those directly in our area that kind of know this little stretch of road, know how it works. You saw in those pictures, it's almost impossible to park in those lines. In terms of getting in and out of this parking space has been described, this is going to be really difficult if our cars are here. And I do want to point out in the drawings that I believe they will be showing that are in your packet from the attached to the appeal letter, that it's both shown in both to being 5 feet. The garage is moved forward 5 feet, not 6'6" has been requested. And based on, I don't have their picture right here, but based on what I'm seeing, the back of the cars will be at about the existing parking space, and that means I have to, if a car parked right here, we'll have to back out to this one, which again, you saw that retaining wall. It's almost impossible to park within this white line right here. So this apparent width is really, it's kind of it's not generally there in real life, in the real conditions of the road. It's almost impossible to park here. The person on the other side can't get out of the car. It's the side mirror is on that retaining wall. So unless we have a little space to get in and out, then it's going to be very difficult to park there correctly. And this being moved actually helps that width, because instead of having that width, we are moved here where it's a little more sloped, and you have a space that you can make this line a little bit differently. So that, to me, none of this information was in the appeal, or else we would have been happy to talk about it. I really tried to be open with the Howards from the very beginning, from when we got our survey, which also was recorded with the county. It takes about, I believe, 6 months for that to actually be searchable. Our surveyor did place that in. I paid for the fee, so it happened. And just as like the last bit, Tad Jacobs, who owns Tree Masters and is a certified arborist, said that there's no indication, this is in your packets, that there's no indication of any trimming of the trees on our property for the last 20 years or so. And just that, and he explains that further. And like I said, we really tried to talk to all the neighbors most affected, including the Howards. And we really tried to take everyone's considerations into account. Yes, we wanted to make a house that we loved, and I believe that Alex Riley really did that. But we really wanted to make sure that everybody was happy. And again, the last point, that lot line, I am totally happy to have that staked properly. If they had requested that at any time, like even last week, last Monday, been happy to do that. Our architect did it at his request so that he could get a sense of where the property line was. And we also have stakes we have driven into the ground. They are not the wooden stakes, I think, as you were describing, but we have the markers, I'm not exactly sure the technical term, in the road at various points that the surveyor did put in. He didn't really, I think on the back line, he didn't want to do it on the Howard's property because he felt like he was, even though it's technically our property, he didn't want to be walking on land that they had been using. He felt that that was a little improper, but we would have been happy to do all that. No problem. Like not even a little bit, or move the poles. So to me, the idea of doing this, all the same issues will be here in 2 weeks when those story poles are moved, because it won't change any of the issues that he says in his appeal. So thank you.
Thank you.
Question?
No, we'll have time for questions later. The appellant, would you like to
Yes, thank you.
have a rebuttal? 5 minutes.
I would. Is there a way that I can get my slides again, Phil? Thank you. I first want to address the point of this idea that this is the first time that we've ever talked about the story pole or the lot line staking. It's not. I'll remind Phil, I'll remind Alex, I'll remind Kevin that we all met on site prior to the review. And you'll recall that one of the points that I talked about was actually this block of text on the back of the application that said it had to be a surveyor. And Phil pointed out that, of course, Alex is a licensed architect and that seems to satisfy what the intent of that block is. But I clearly called out that I couldn't tell where the poles were, what their height was, based on the information that I was given. And so that's why they had Alex come out and drive the stakes along the lot line. So it's not the first that we're talking about at this point. I'm going to blast past this because it's actually making the case for the relocating of the garage. I want to get to the parking analysis because it is a big point on the Hill. So let me get through this stuff. Sorry. Okay, so this is where Michael Harlock has done a great job measuring everything on the street surrounding us. I'm going to highlight some things so it's easy to see. On the left, you can see our property with its garage and parking apron in front. And on the right, you can see the 141 Crescent with the garage over studio and parking in front. This is their proposed plan. Here are the current public spaces in this area. And here is the moving lane, what most people will call the street. I'm told, though, that there's actually a right-of-way that extends much further. You can see a property line bisecting my parking pad. It says PL on it, right? That effectively half of my parking pad is in the public right-of-way. And that is extremely common on Christmas Tree Hill. I think it's part of why there's an overlay district there. But look here. This is where the pinch point is that everybody's concerned with. It's 13 feet, stripe to stripe. And yes, if somebody gets out of the stripe a little bit, it gets too narrow for big vehicles to pass through, right? It is a concern for everybody, including me. Here's what we're proposing, though. The garage moves forward, the parking pad moves forward, the public space has already been relocated. That is already approved and is going to be done, right? So we're not asking for that public space to be relocated. It's done. You end up with 16.6 clear. What is today the tightest point on the street becomes the widest. It's the widest area of moving lane now. And this is one of the major points. Kevin points out that he's talked to neighbors. He has. I don't discount that. It was months ago, though. We've now talked to all of our neighbors this weekend and showed them this presentation, and I have almost all of their support saying, yep, looks like that actually is better. And we agree, if they can satisfy your rear view concern and still satisfy the street, we fully support you. That's really all I need to say, I think. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Final round of questions for appellant, applicant, or staff. Sloan, no.
thank you.
Carla?
Okay, I just have a quick question for the applicant. Would you be willing to do some sort of redesign that would
Do you mean
actually...
appellant or applicant?
I'm talking about the applicants.
Okay.
Yeah. To do some redesign so that the bay views are preserved for the neighbors.
I had said, so my view always, one, is I still have not seen any real evidence of a view. If I've really felt that this was a massive issue originally, I would have addressed that in our plans. This came up once the story reports were already up and once we'd already submitted that this view was an issue. As a point of emphasis, if it had come up, it was in my understanding, it was a minor issue at best. There was a minor issue of maybe it will affect a view off of a deck that we haven't built yet. So I was very surprised at this meeting when Phil and I, as he said, met and talked about those story polls, which, anyway, that's not this question. So that is one part. I also need to, so for me to make a major change to my design that majorly negatively impacts the design, and I do question, I haven't seen any of these diagrams. I saw some of the original ones that were in the appeal packet. I haven't had a chance to look at this, but I don't see how this makes a huge difference to his view that haven't ever seen other than in a view analysis that I can't read as a layperson, how this would affect him. So if there's a way that we can do this without massively hurting our design and making it really getting in and out of the house less or more difficult or costing a ton more money. Also, the Christmas Tree Hill says you should avoid excavation, which we do. And that to me is a huge important part. So if we can do some way that satisfies him without making a major problem to our design, and I still think impacting the neighborhood, and yes, that might be wide, it's not as wide as we're going to make it. And so it will be even better. So I'm always happy to find a compromise. I haven't seen a compromise yet that isn't a major detriment to us while only a minor improvement to the Howards. And that's kind of the calculation. And also I still see from neighbors the issue being this parking. The ones most affected still say no, and I don't want to have 3 people against me all of a sudden if I'm just making one person happy.
Okay, well, just for reassurance.
Yes.
In the years that I've sat up here, whether it be the council or the planning commission, when situations have arisen like this, usually the applicant as well as the appellant are so much happier with the redesign. So I would suggest that you try not to resist it. You might find something that you like even better.
Like I said, we spent a great deal of time looking at his suggestions and trying to find ways of making it work, and we were not able to do so. We did that in good faith, and I really wanted that to happen because I don't want my next door neighbor. I didn't want to get to this point. We just weren't able to find a way to do that.
Right, and I'm sure you've got a talented architect
Absolutely,
that could
extremely
probably come up with something that would make everybody happy.
We've
You
tried,
included.
We've tried, but we have not been able to reach that point yet through months and months of discussions. And that's why I'm just a little bit hesitant to say absolutely, yes, I would love to find a way that made everyone happy. We tried. It hasn't happened yet to make the entire neighborhood happy, which, again, I think we will make several people unhappy, and they may even oppose us in the future to have multiple people opposing us directly affected. I haven't found a way. We have tried. We've been doing this since February. We've been in discussion since February. We've shown him sketches, given him various ideas. The Howards have not liked anything that we've done. We still feel on balance, we are helping the neighborhood. We are with most of the most affected neighbors that we've had, and those neighbors we've had a chance to actually talk to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Jim?
I have a question for the applicant, but.
Applicant?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, they are, sorry.
There,
Into the microphone, please, Jim.
on, if you're looking at this diagram, further to the right, there's sort of a gravel pathway.
Up here?
Yes, leading to the lower level.
Correct.
Are you going to retain that?
To some extent, we don't have any particular plans for that area, especially because, like I said, as it was recorded, that is part of, I'm thinking her name is Elizabeth, I didn't break my notes up here.
Right.
And she had recorded that that was an issue, so we obviously weren't going to do anything with that, considering that that was her property and all that. But at this point, there may be little things we do, but there's not much planned for that area. But due to setbacks, that was our original thought of where we'd put a garage, but setbacks will not allow that in any way, shape, or form. Now, this may or may not be possible, but kind of as a continuance of your question earlier, if there's a way that we can meet halfway on this, if they have a proposal of a way that we can meet halfway, that's fine by us, and it's just been, like I said, to us, the goalposts have kept changing as we've discussed with the Howards. So if there's a way that we can say, this will make us happy and have that in writing, which we have thought that we've made them happy on multiple occasions, only to find that we haven't, and that I'm totally happy to do. If we can find a way to meet halfway on that, then that is okay with me. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, Jim?
No, but I think you should keep that gravel path for
Okay,
teenage
you know what,
parking.
we'll have time for comments and
Next
deliberation
week.
in a few minutes. I'm sorry, Bob, you said no questions?
No questions.
For you? Down here, you're done? Okay, I have a question for staff. Would you mind going to that slide that showed the view out the appellant's dining room window?
Sure. Can I make one comment on these two slides?
Sure.
Just for clarification. So my understanding is, so the proposal from day one is to remove the existing parking space in front of the garage. Public Works is okay with that. So this existing parking space will be moved from here to there. So when that happens, the clearness will be from here to here, as proposed by the applicant. The appellant mentions that under this scenario, the clearance will be 16 feet 6 inches, which is correct. However, with the applicant's proposal, that distance would be whatever that is. And I'm guessing that's more than 16. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
So you wanted pictures from my presentation of the view. So this is one image, again, taken from the applicant's
Right.
balcony, looking more or less, south to east, maybe southeast.
Right, and there's on the site a double-trunked oak tree that will be removed under
Correct.
this plan.
Correct.
Is that what we are looking at, or will any of this existing greenery shield any of the construction, to your knowledge?
Will any of this existing greenery shield the construction?
Shield the
Improvement.
new structure from the neighbor's viewpoint?
No, my understanding is the majority of this greenery, this is a privet tree. These are privets right here. Beyond that is the double-trunked oak. So both those trees will go away. And so that would result in a change of the view.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, let's go for questions. No? No, at this point, we're going to bring it back to council for discussion. Sorry, you had your time, I'm sorry. All right. Who wants to start?
We've closed public discussion.
Well, did you want me to close public discussion?
Oh, we don't close it.
technically?
We want to extend the meeting.
If you're thinking of continuing the matter, then you don't want to close the public session. I think what you can say is you're ending public input at this point in time so that you can determine whether or not to close the public hearing or not, and make that initial determination. And then if you decide that you're going to proceed and not continue the matter, you could close the public hearing.
Okay, so I will end public comment at this time so that we may deliberate as a council and determine whether or not we will be closing the public hearing or continuing the matter to a future meeting. So, we have before us not only just the project itself, but what has come up with the placement of the story poles. Unless anyone else wants to jump in, I'll just kind of launch into my concerns about that. I take story poles very seriously. I think it's one of the things that neighbors really rely on to really get a sense of what a building's impact is going to be. As I mentioned, this came up with a recent project. The story poles had come down, there was an appeal. We asked for them to be put back up so that the public could see what the impact of the proposed building would be. We didn't want to have the applicant, in that case, incur all those extra costs. I don't want to force you to incur those costs. I don't want to delay the project. Final decision. However, I just think it's the fair thing to do for the community to ensure that we are as accurate as possible in what the project is. So I feel like we should, I feel strongly that I would support continuing this matter until such time as we can have those story poles corrected and the property line marked so that we can all have a chance to view that and see the impact, and also have the community see that. That being said, I, number one, hope that won't take very long. And number two, I would hope that in the meantime, maybe the neighbors could get together and come up with maybe a compromise, maybe not one or the other, maybe something in between, maybe something new. It'd save everybody a lot of hassle, and hopefully can mend some relationships. So I would encourage you in the meantime to try to do that, kind of like what you had said, Carla. I appreciated what you said. So those are my thoughts. What do you think?
The only thing I was going to add, but I don't know if I have the concurrence with my fellow council members, if there could be some type of a redesign so that the views from 135 Crescent are preserved. I'm really concerned about that. I mean, that's one of the protected rights, particularly on the Hill, and so I would hope that there would be some kind of exploration of that alternative.
Do you mind if I ask you? If you look at this, I mean, it's trees right now, which are lovely. I love trees. I love looking at greenery. If the trees come down, it's actually, they may have more of a distance view, but yes, there will be a building right there. I mean, it's...
Yeah, and that's what my concern is with this particular photo, the wall that comes out could just entirely block the view. And this we can't see, really, we see it in the written information, but this photograph doesn't do either side justice.
But there's also so much greenery. If you look at the one on the right, there's so much greenery. I can't even see where the existing house is. That might,
But it's going to go away.
the greenery.
Yeah.
Right, but then you have a distance view behind.
No, you have a
If
view of
the
their house.
wall if the wall of the new structure isn't blocking it.
Well, you can see, based on the red, where the wall would be.
I know, but what I'm saying is that I don't feel real comfortable with those two
right.
representations.
I think we've all agreed that the story poles are in the wrong place. I think we all agree with you. I think speculating on what the view may or may not be until we have all that certified is not necessary, and I think we should move ahead and continue this.
No,
Because
I-
I think I'm in complete agreement with what you said, but speculating on views or not views with what we've already said about the story poles doesn't make sense.
One caveat, I'd like to see netting up as opposed to just strings if possible, because then you can get a sense of the mass.
That might be a little difficult considering the greenery there, but if netting's possible, I think that would be
If,
helpful. Yeah,
so.
okay. Sloan?
Yeah, I'm in favor of, doing the story polls. I would say one thing I might just point out, observe to the group, if you don't mind, Madam Mayor, is that, we see these applications on a semi-regular basis, and that's a beautiful community up there and a great neighborhood, and I feel cautious when there's an entrenchment within the neighborhood of neighbor versus neighbor a little bit. There's an opportunity here for, whether it's 2 weeks or whatever it is till the next meeting, a month, to recognize there will be an aftermath to the intensity with which you stake out your position. So please be sensitive to the fact that you're going to remain neighbors, and the vehemence with which you want to protect your own family's property rights and views and everything, that's super important, but so is everybody else's, and we're all living next to each other, and we have a town where we not only live next to each other, we love each other. We've chosen to be here, and I would just implore you, remember that we're still living right next to each other, no matter what happens. At the end of the day, if you insist, we'll make the decision. We are obliged to do so, and you're entitled to that judgment. We will make that judgment. But if you can find some alternate path, I promise you, you will be happy.
Okay.
If I may, just before you move to the next step here, I just wanted to get some clarification when you go ahead and, it sounds like maybe make a motion. But I would like clarification on specifically, are we talking about all of the story polls? Because there's a lot of story polls, but I think we focused this evening on the 4 closest polls to 135 Crescent. And so I'd like to understand if that's the extent of what the council is requesting. And then I'd just like to make a point about the survey certifications, that there is a margin of error often when they do that. Even the certification of story poles, whether it's 6 inches or so, we often see that when they do give that certification, that there is a margin of error of 6 inches, sometimes even a foot. So when we say exact, just note that that is included in that, and you may see that coming back to you with that caveat.
Okay.
Okay, so the option is those 4 poles, all the poles,
Yeah, those would say
Some
would be the two,
combination of-
yeah, or you can,
in
yeah.
between. Okay, thoughts on story poles? I personally am okay with, I think, those 4, but I'd like to say, and any others that are representative of the view that should be shifted. What do you think?
Sounds good to me. I'll move that we continue this
I'll second.
with the replacement of the location of the story poles. And,
Lot line markers?
yeah, and there should be lot line markers. And sometimes stakes are okay. The little round discs that they put in, those can really run up. But if they're if the surveyor is willing to make sure that the stake is buried enough that somebody isn't going to just be able to pull it up and relocate it, I think that that would be okay, and I've seen that done.
In Corte Madera?
Not in Corte Madera.
Okay,
no.
good. Glad to
Not
hear
in
that.
Corte Madera.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon?
Yes.
Mayor First?
Yes. All right, thank you all for your patience, and sorry, but I guess we'll see you all again at an upcoming meeting to be determined. Thank you. All right. It's 10 o'clock. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? And let's all meet back here at 10:10, please. 10:11. All right. We are now on to agenda item 6.2. First reading and possible action to introduce ordinance 967 to amend the Town of Corte Madera Municipal Code, Section 18.08 and Section 18.24, to increase the allowable maximum portion of parcels that may be covered by structures in the R1 residential zone. Doug, hello.
All right, thank you. So to start with some background, like the previous item, this has been through the Planning Commission as well. This is a zoning ordinance amendment concerning lot coverage, primarily affecting the R1 medium-density residential zone. Prior to being before you tonight, this went through the Planning Commission on 3 separate hearings, the first of which was a kind of a preliminary study session to discuss kind of the concept. The impetus for beginning this process and for exploring lot coverage standards was based on requests from the Planning Commission to look into this, which was based on receiving a number of variance requests for lot coverage, and to sort of look at our existing standards, compare them to neighboring jurisdictions, and look at the usefulness and kind of look at how it works and kind of re-examine it and look for opportunities for improvement. And in doing so, staff identified a number of potential positive outcomes to making some changes to the lot coverage maximums for R1. So we'll go through some of those specifics and then leave a healthy amount of time for discussion and questions. So first of all, just explaining what lot coverage is, so that we're all on the same page there, and kind of explaining what it is not. So lot coverage is, put very simply, the footprint of structures on a lot expressed relative to the size of the lot. So it's a percentage, the footprint of the structures to the lot. All structures that are over 3 feet are counted. We'll go a little bit more into the definition of what's counted and what's not, but this is your basic definition with a couple of diagrams for reference. And to explain what it is not, lot coverage is one of multiple standards that govern the physical development on a lot. In addition, there's setbacks, which we are quite familiar with. There is height, of course, and there is floor area ratio. Now, floor area ratio, the difference between lot coverage and floor area is that floor area looks at the total amount of square footage that's enclosed, in a structure. So whereas lot coverage, let's say it's a 10 by 10 structure, the lot coverage is going to be 100 square feet, but if you add another story to that, the floor area is going to increase, it's going to double, but the lot coverage is going to stay the same. So that's the difference here. And this discussion does not affect floor area or the maximum size of a structure. So again, lot coverage, the easiest way to think of it, there are some specific features called out here, but the simplest way to think of it are features that are over 3 feet in height from grade are counted toward lot coverage. So that might include something like a raised deck beyond the house itself, something like a raised deck. There's other examples here, and some other things that are actually exempted. An eave, for instance, might extend out, over, so it might be, you might see that as coverage, but it's actually exempted up to 3 feet. There's some other specific exemptions as well. And there is an additional note here just about in floodplain areas, if a house is raised and there needs to be the addition of steps to be able to enter that house, some of those steps might count toward lot coverage. So in anticipation of that, to try to accommodate and facilitate that in the floodplain, there's an additional 2% in those situations. So looking at the existing lot coverage standard, this is what is already applies to R1 lots. And I should just step back real quick and just say that R1 medium density zoning applies to the majority of housing in the town. And I don't have the exact number, but we're looking at like at least a couple thousand residential lots that this would apply to that are within R1 zoning. Looking at the existing and what that looks this doesn't work. Looking at the existing standards and how those apply to different lots, it should be pointed out that it's kind of on a sliding scale. So the maximum lot coverage that's permitted is higher for smaller lots. And there's a transition period between 6,000 and I think 7,500 square foot lots. And so it goes from 35% down to 30%. So the minimum on a large lot would be 30%. It doesn't go any lower than that, and the maximum is 35%. As referenced before, one of the reasons we're looking into this is because of the number of variances. Staff was able to identify 13 or more variances in the last 10 years alone for lot coverage. And often, we're seeing requests for 40%, 43%, around that, obviously varying depending on the case. But here's just a table to express what that means for a certain type of a lot. So for instance, on a 5,000 square foot lot where the lot coverage is 35%, that allows 1,750 square feet of coverage. And again, to differentiate between floor area and coverage, the maximum floor area for that lot is actually 2,800 square feet. So at some point, if you wanted to build a single-story house, the biggest that could be is 1,750 square feet. You could work toward, that maximum floor area and add a second story, then getting you closer to that maximum of 2,800 square feet. But lot coverage is one of those limiting factors, and it changes the options that are available to someone who's looking at, designing or doing an addition or, constructing a new home. So one of the proposed changes is and I've kind of broken them up, but they're all included as an attachment. Obviously, both as the ordinance that's being that may be introduced tonight, as well as a Planning Commission resolution, the actual ordinance that they have recommended that the Town Council support, introduce, and adopt. So that's all clarified in attachments. But just to go over it briefly here. The proposal is to increase the lot coverage to 40%, and that would be raising it from 30 on a lot like that's 7,500 square feet to 40, or a lot that's smaller that might have 35% currently would be raised to 40. And we'll go over some of the reasons why and what that actually looks like on in a couple different scenarios. And then eliminating lot coverage for lots that are below 4,500 square feet. And I won't read through this, but if there's any need for clarification, I'm happy to speak to that. So this is looking at two different sizes of lots, and in exploring this, we kind of looked at different scenarios and different shapes of lots. So I'll try to keep this as simple as possible to avoid boring everyone here. So there's a 4,500 square foot lot. There's two of them shown on the left there, and there's two different shapes of lots that are 7,500 square feet shown on the right. And we use just kind of different widths to show how these things actually size up. So on the left, you see a smaller lot, and you see the area that can be built within when you remove the setbacks. So that darker gray is the area that's left over that would be the maximum lot coverage. So on the widest of the 4,500 square foot lots, just the setbacks alone create an effective lot coverage that is 32%. So even though the maximum in theory is 35%, when you take away parts of the lot for the setbacks, you're actually just left with 32%. If you change the shape of the 4,500 square foot lot, you make it much more narrow, you can see the maximum of 35%. And then you see if there was no lot coverage, the maximum coverage just based on setbacks alone would be 48%. And again, the same situation on the right, and I'll explain what the yellow is in just a moment here. So the second proposal is, in addition to making 40% for all lots over 4,500 square feet and eliminating lot coverage for lots below 4,500 square feet, the proposal to allow an additional 2% of lot coverage for unenclosed structures no greater than 10 feet in height, such as arbors, trellises, raised decks. So the idea here and the intent here and the understanding is based on our exploration of other, basically the different projects that requested lot coverage variances, and even those that haven't. We're looking at different cases throughout town. Oftentimes there's a request based on having a sunshade over the rear portion of the house, or having certain kind of detached structures like a storage shed, that sort of thing, or even just having an arbor or a trellis like we've specifically exempted here. The idea is that certain components that would normally contribute to lot coverage, when they're unenclosed, they represent less of bulk and massing, and that maybe there would be an additional kind of room to accommodate those things. And so that's spoken to here. So, well, let me go back to this. So this is the yellow portion, is that additional 2%. So we're looking at 30%, let's say the 7,500 square foot lot scenario on the right, these two different lots. We're showing what the existing lot coverage shows in dark gray, the 30%. We're showing what 40% looks like and what additional that provides. And then we're looking also at the 2% in addition. So under the proposed zoning ordinance amendments, this scenario on the right for 7,500 square foot lot would be the entirety of the dark gray, green, and yellow. So I hope that makes some sense.
Doug, I'm sorry, can you go back and I didn't get that.
Okay, so, all right.
Sorry, Mayor, I missed that.
That's fine.
Yeah, I hope I'm not being too
And then can you also explain what the white is?
verbose. Yeah, so let's take a specific example. So on this 7,500 square foot lot here, the width or the street frontage is 70 feet. The setbacks are shown using this light gray. This is the front setback, the side setbacks are shown, and then the rear setback. That leaves you with this area. And you can, assuming a simple flat lot, a structure could be placed anywhere within those setbacks. But just to simplify, it's been pushed to the front here. The existing lot coverage, the maximum permitted is 30%. And so that's shown in dark gray. With the proposed zoning ordinance amendment that would allow up to 40% lot coverage, this is the portion in addition to the existing 30% that would now be allowed.
Okay.
And on top of that, the 2% for particular types of structures, such as an arbor or a trellis.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, Diane?
Sure.
Doug, just a quick question. If you go back to the last slide, do the side yard and rear and front yard setbacks, are they the same? They're not going to be changed?
So that's a good question. So there's no proposed change to these setbacks.
Okay.
Here at all. No proposed change to any of the other development standards, height, floor area, setbacks. None of those are proposed to be changed. So this is assuming those remain constant.
Great, thank you.
And the last change, so there's the 40% or the elimination of lot coverage altogether for lots of particular size. There's the additional 2% for certain types of unenclosed structures. And then lastly, this is purely to clarify the existing language. It's not to rewrite or change the intent or even change what is included in the definition of lot coverage or how it's measured. This is simply to take the existing language and try to improve it for the sake of clarity. So this is something where, if the intent is not to change the meaning or what is included at all. So purely for clarification. And this is the last proposed change. So through these changes, staff believes that these changes would create greater flexibility for property owners, homeowners who are looking at doing additions, who are looking at potentially developing, constructing a new home. Because what we've seen time and time again is that there may be a greater potential for neighborhood impacts when someone is looking at a second-story addition than when they're expanding a single-story structure. And as we saw earlier here, there's a discrepancy between maximum floor area and maximum lot coverage. So the scenario where someone has a 5,000 square foot lot and lot coverage limits them to 1,750 square feet of coverage for a single-story house, they may be looking and saying, we need more room, we have 2 kids on the way and we want to do an addition of a new bedroom. So they're looking at the maximum floor area, which is 2,800 square feet, and they're saying, so we've maxed out our lot coverage, we want to do an addition, but we can't add it on the first floor, so the remaining option is to add it above on a second floor. And maybe that's more expensive, maybe neither they want it and the neighbors don't want it either, and they're looking for options that would be most beneficial to everyone involved and everyone affected. And so by increasing the lot coverage, this doesn't change the size of the house that they can build, but it provides more flexibility and recognizes some of the potential impacts of second-story additions. And furthermore, the general plan has specific policies that encourage changes that promote flexibility in both design and to facilitate residential reinvestment and quality design. And staff believes that this would do that. Furthermore, these changes the goal would be to reduce or eliminate variance applications for lot coverage altogether. And so that pretty much concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions and provide any clarification, and I appreciate whatever feedback you have after reviewing this. And again, this is just an introduction of the ordinance, if you so choose, and the next step would be a second reading at a future date. And again, this went through the Planning Commission, and what you see has been unchanged since their recommendation for the proposed changes to the zoning ordinance.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
Doug, can I ask you, at the Planning Commission, when this was being discussed, were there numerous people that spoke out against it, feeling that the lot coverage was going to be too big?
We haven't received a whole lot of feedback in general. I believe there was, in my recollection, there was one or 2 comments of concern, both of which were confusing floor area and lot coverage. And the confusion being that this would somehow change the size of a house that could be built, or it would change the actual setbacks. I believe we received one letter a couple days ago that is really, it's speaking about lot coverage, but it's really referring to setbacks, and the concern that by changing this, it would allow a house to be built even closer to a neighboring residence, but this doesn't affect setbacks whatsoever. So I don't believe we received any comments of concern or regarding the actual changes in lot coverage.
Okay, thank you.
Sloan?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay. Jim?
I have a couple of questions. With lot coverage, a garage would be included in there?
Correct.
And with FAR, a garage should be included in there?
Correct.
What happens if I sunk the garage into the ground so the ceiling's 4.5 feet above grade? Would that be included for FAR?
It would be included. It would count. So if it would be counted toward lot coverage, first of all.
Right.
And then in terms of floor area, I believe when you're measuring from grade to the ceiling height, if it's less than 5 feet, I believe, then it does not count toward floor area.
Okay. So I could easily, if I had a 5,000 square foot lot, I could easily get up to 2,800 feet depending on the water table.
So we do see applications where, well, first of all, floor area is really a control on bulk and massing, and I think that's the reason why there's exceptions for placing that square footage essentially underground or tucking it into the topography.
Mm-hmm.
So we do see situations where that is an approach that people take.
Bob?
Nope. Thank you.
I have a question. In the staff report on page 4 and then continuing on to page 5, you list some of the policies for other jurisdictions in Marin. For instance, let's just take Mill Valley. You list a maximum lot coverage of 40%, and then you list minimum lot size of 6,000. What does that minimum lot size refer to, for instance, in comparison to this chart you have on the screen right now?
Yeah, so generally minimum lot, that was included as an attempt to kind of normalize between different jurisdictions that have different zones. So minimum lot size means that if you were to create a new lot, within that zone, that would be the minimum size that would be
Oh, got
acceptable.
it. But
But,
there are probably grandfathered in lots of various sizes.
Many, yes.
Dating back 120 years ago.
Yes, and the interesting thing is, we don't have available here, but if you ever care to experiment on the public Marin Map website, you can query based on lot size, and you can see, how many lots there are that are actually under 3,000 square feet that are residential, and there's actually quite a few, certainly more than I would have thought. And we do quote the number of lots that are under or substandard in size, and it actually exceeds the number of residential R1 lots that are at that standard or above it.
In Corte Madera?
In Corte Madera.
Okay. Now, getting back to this table that's in the staff report, this 40%, for instance, that you listed for Mill Valley, that is their percentage for any size lot in their equivalent of R1?
In my and in our kind of explanation or exploration of other jurisdictions, I think it was fairly unique that Corte Madera had the sliding scale.
Okay.
It's much more common to have a fixed number.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I was sort of getting
Yeah.
at. Okay.
And if there was any change, it would have been specified. But these are all just flat.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Jim.
In terms of the variances that were requested, were they requested to expand horizontally so they didn't have to go vertically?
I can't speak to specific. I don't have specific examples. But there's certainly some of those. The desire was to maintain a single level,
Okay.
which is part of the reason that was kind of that we found that it provided flexibility, because it was clear that there are definitely specific situations where people are, kind of like the hypothetical scenario that I proposed, where we see that people do want to do 120 square feet or even 50 square feet. And that's, even if it's 50 or 25 square feet, that's exceeding the maximum, that requires a variance.
Okay.
So,
Well, since this is one of the objective standards you have to measure a project, could we get the same effect but maintain more control for the town by just adding the trade-off between height and extent is one of the variables you could use for variances?
is your question whether it's a possibility to create a variance process to allow case-by-case evaluation of those that want to exceed the maximum?
The current maximum, okay, and just say, okay, yeah, we will give you a variance, but you want to go out, fine, we'll give you the variance, but you're going to have to give up on going vertically.
Certainly anything can be under consideration tonight, but part of the problem with, there may be ways of providing flexibility or alternative kind of processes for those that want to exceed a certain number. I think there's a problem with using the variance process to accommodate that, though, because a variance is really, you're asking for an exception to the rule, and part of that process is set up to to have clear reasons why it's a unique scenario. And it's not just, hey, this would be nice, but it's, we have particular physical constraints of our lot, particular reasons that set us apart that don't allow us to comply. It's not there to provide, just more options. It's really there to say, I mean, it's required by law to provide that channel for those very limited but, specific scenarios where someone doesn't, it may be impossible to comply. The classic scenario of a variance is when you have a rock literally sitting in the middle of the lot and you have a developable parcel other than that rock and you can't physically comply with the setbacks or what have you because, there's the rock. I mean,
But we're talking about coming up with design guidelines and so on. How are we going to encourage people to take those guidelines to heart if all the objective standards are being relaxed and Sacramento's about to tell us that everything has to be done ministerially?
Okay. We'll see about that, but I think it is a good point that lot coverage is one of multiple standards that governs the pattern of development and the design of residential structures, but it is one of multiple. So simply changing lot coverage does not provide a voucher to do anything you want on a lot. If something is subject to the design review process, it's subject to all the required findings related to harmony with surrounding neighborhood, neighborhood impacts, et cetera. So this is by no means, opening the floodgates, or so to speak.
And if I may, just real quickly, I think one of the reasons of doing this is that it actually incentivizes some of the development that we actually want and that is called for in our general plan, which is more single-story design. And if we give more flexibility for people to actually do that, rather than forcing them upstairs, I think that's one of the things that this can actually do. So I would say that this does provide that incentive that we're trying to encourage.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Doug. I will open it to public comment. Yes, please approach the podium. 3 minutes.
Phyllis Metcalf, Parkview Circle. I want to encourage you to support this. It was very carefully looked at in the Planning Commission. As a matter of fact, Adam reached out to 2 of the local architects to give input when he was preparing the information to bring before us. One of them was Michael Harlock, and the other was, I don't remember his first name, Pearlstein.
Richard
Pearlstein. And they came to the meeting and talked to us about this. So one thing to assure you, Jim, these are maximums. They set the limitations. They are not entitlements. So it could be 40% for lot coverage, but when you look at the building itself, when you look at the other areas that the ordinances cover for these objective things, it may end up that only 36 will be allowed in this particular case. So too many people have come before the Planning Commission the years I've been on it and very proudly announced, well, I asked for no variances, so I expect this to be approved. That isn't how it works. So don't think because it's 40%, there's going to be a plethora of large houses filling lots. And once again, as I say, I ask you to consider backing this and supporting it because it will be very good for Corte Madera.
Before you sit down, would you mind, Mayor, first, if I ask her a question? Phyllis, I thought that the large point that you were pointing out from Dick Spotswood's column earlier tonight was that he points out vague or, greater flexibility in Corte Madera either gives planning commissioners great discretion to promote good design or it's an excuse to rubber stamp mediocrity. It was the exact problem I thought you were pointing out to us, but this is...
That is the findings. The findings are not the ordinances. The findings are the so-called design review. Remember I said you can put a fish tank in the middle of the lot and it doesn't block somebody's view and it doesn't take down a tree. Those are the findings. That second page that I gave you is what Dick is referring to. These ordinances are the objective things that are lot coverage, the FAR, the height, side, rear, and front setbacks. If you just follow those, you're going to have a box. It's the design review and good findings that are going to give you the interesting creative house or building.
But my understanding is that the reason why the Planning Commission is suggesting, or the director is suggesting, we do this is to provide greater flexibility because there's an overabundance of variances now, right?
But in this case, the flexibility allows people who wish to expand their homes on the ground floor and not build upwards. Somebody wants to add a bedroom, somebody wants to add a den or a family room. If they fulfill the lot coverage, the only way they can go is a second story. When you get to the second story is when neighbors get concerned about blocking views, looking in their windows, etc. This way, people who wish to expand will have an opportunity to expand in a way that least affects others. It has nothing to do with whether it's pretty or it's a great design. It has to do with whether or not it fulfills their needs and the ordinance itself.
Okay, thank you.
Does that make sense? I don't think so, the way you're looking at me, Sloan.
I'm pondering. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak to this?
I'll take a stab at it, Peter Chase. So the FAR does not increase with any of this. So that is still the same limitation. So they can have the boxes just spread out flatter in theory. Does that make sense when we're talking about this?
It does. I guess that what the answer is this is not addressing the problem that we have kind of mutually come to the conclusion that we suffer here in Corte Madera, which is that our design standards are alternately too loose or too restrictive in the wrong ways. And I don't know how to fix that. This, as I understand it, doesn't really affect how we change the look of Corte Madera, but it provides it provides even greater flexibility. My issue with it, and the reason I was pointing it out to Phyllis there, was that I'm apprehensive that we're providing an even greater opportunity to introduce even more mediocrity without even a variance review, because we no longer have even that threshold of protection of the Planning Commission passing judgment. And I acknowledge, Phyllis, what you said before, that people who have not exceeded the numbers for maximum lot coverage, they do have a sense of entitlement. And although in the Planning Commission, with great experience, you might recognize the fact that that's not a technical, for sure, if you're a homeowner and you own this property and you comply with these fairly Byzantine standards to the uninitiated, you feel like, gosh darn it, I'm underneath all the requirements, and now the Planning Commission is telling me that I still can't do it? I mean, it feels to a normal person as wildly unfair. And that disconnect, I'm not sure is addressed by the issue in front of us, and maybe I'm segueing into a larger or deeper problem. I'm apprehensive that, I'm not fully persuaded that there's an overabundance of variances, which by fixing this, we are somehow curing. I acknowledge that this might make it easier for people to have single-story houses rather than second stories. I'm not sure we ought to be, I thought there was an issue 10 years ago in town where we decided second stories are not discouraged. No? I don't know. Do you remember this, or am I imagining that?
It's not, I mean, they're still clearly allowed, and they're still going to be reviewed. So it's not, I think, by the tables, they're still, you're still not going to maximize the FAR by a single-story design most often. And frankly, I just wanted to make one distinction. Design review is still required for any development over 250 square feet, or any increase in floor area of 250 square feet or more. It could be staff level or potentially up to the Planning Commission. So that's where the design issues are focused in our code and in most people's code. The variance, again, and one of the problems I think that we're trying to address is the variance is not a check on design. It's a check on the issues of unique factors that should be, I should say, that findings need to be made about uniqueness of the lot. There's something particularly different about your property that's, you can't do the normal rules and have them apply to your lot. That's what the variance, it's been used in the past to grant sort of exceptions to lot coverage.
Where you think in retrospect they weren't merited.
Well, I think it's become a practice whereby it becomes, frankly, a little bit more difficult when somebody has gotten ones on a lot in Madera Gardens, and the neighbor says, well, I want the same thing, and you say, well, yeah, I mean, I get worried about the precedent that was created under the former regime, frankly, of having the coverage. And it also points to the fact, since they were granted time and time again, that we were okay with higher lot coverage. So I think there's a couple of things there that pointed us to changing this.
But this, you think, sets the reset button? Is that why you want to do
I
it?
would like to do that, absolutely, that's part of it.
I'll just finish
Sorry,
by
Peter,
saying
go
that it's
ahead.
quite
I'm
all right
sorry.
that it is a separate review, it is a separate process. I think this enhances the possibility for architecture to be better in a flatter design and so forth. We did approve a number of couple of applications recently where they were just hemmed in, and they didn't ask for a variance. They just hemmed the project in, and they said, yeah, we want another bathroom, but we can't get it because we just don't have enough lot coverage to do this. And they've really struggled severely to come up with an appropriate design. We approved it. They didn't want to go through a variance. They understood that they didn't have that unusual circumstance. The unusual shapes that arrive on Christmas Tree Hill or some other places are places where variances may apply because of hardship or unusual circumstances. Rectangular lots in Madera Gardens don't really qualify for that, but this fixes some of these small lot problems that people have faced, and it also allows them to be a little more creative. That's the hope, and the design review is a separate process. We're working on that to get better control guidelines for design review. That's my
Thank you.
statement.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak? Okay. And then you.
Anybody else?
Jim Rizzo, 16 Sarah Street. I'm a community member, also developer architect in the area. I'd just like to say, I think in hearing all the arguments here, worked in Larkspur where 40% is kind of the norm for a 5,000 square foot lot. I think what we're going to see here, if we do allow, which I'm encouraging that this passes, you're going to see some more creative designs with our requirements for parking and off-street parking and larger garages on the first floor, and some of the guidelines we're seeing with setting back the upper stories to allow for light and air and views, allowing some of these uses to happen on the ground floor with more lot coverage is going to allow a lot more of these applications to pass some of the guidelines which we're encouraging some of the applicants to have. So I'd like to support this if I could. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Cassie Christensen, and I live at Mohawk Avenue here in Corte Madera. And I wanted to speak to you to support also this proposal. Most of my arguments have already been made by others about why I think this is a good thing, but I did want to point out that one of my concerns about the current lot coverage standards is not so much that we're concerned about discouraging second stories, but in fact, this discourages first story additions. And I think that a level playing field where homeowners have the choice of a single story addition or a second story addition is a nice thing to have. I also wanted to point out, Sloan, you mentioned concern about mediocrity of design. Second story mediocre designs are much more visible than single story ones.
Jennifer Larson.
everybody seems to think this is a great idea except for me. I don't think it's a great idea because I think it opens the floodgate. And I don't understand why we're at 30 or 35% now and we're lobbying for 40. And 5 years from now, we're going to come back and everybody's going to complain and then there's going to be 50. Somebody mentioned Larkspur. I have to say, it's really interesting when you drive around Larkspur and you notice all the homes are really right up against the property line. I mean, you can feel the difference going from Larkspur to Corte Madera. It actually feels more spacious here. And I never really thought about that until about 3 minutes ago of why that was. So now I know. I think there's a reason that we have the lot coverage as it is. And I just am afraid of opening the floodgates. So I say no.
Okay, is there any other member of the public who would like to speak? Seeing none, let's bring it back to council. Who wants to start?
I will.
Okay, Bob.
First off, we're not talking about an enormous change in the existing ordinance. We're talking about a lot of times a difference of 5%. Secondly, we're bringing ourselves into line with other towns. I think the other towns are there for a reason. But I think the most important thing about this is it's not just giving the applicant an opportunity to expand on one story if they want to. And there were actually, I think, was it 13 variances issued since 2007 was issued in the
I think
staff
it's
report?
at least, yeah.
So there have been significant variances, and nobody wants to go through a variance process. What I think it really does, though, is it gives the planning commission the option to direct an applicant to expand on one level, because it gives them another tool that they can use to encourage better design, have less impact on neighbors. It gives them a lot more flexibility than they've had in the past. So I like that about it. And then I think most importantly, Jennifer, I understand your concern about appearances, but we're not changing floor area ratio, right, which is a huge governor on the size of the house. That's the main one. And most importantly, we're not changing setbacks. Setbacks govern how far the house is set back from the street, how far apart it is from the neighbors, how far it is from the rear. None of that's changing. So, I think we're talking about minimal impacts here, but something that gives the planning commission and applicants a lot more flexibility. So I will be voting for this.
Thank you. Jim?
With the various legislation in Sacramento, where they are basically going to take away design review from planning commissions and just make the decisions ministerial based on objective standards, I am very hesitant to relax any of our existing objective standards. So I'm going to vote against this.
Okay, Sloan?
Wait, can I ask a question about that, though? Jim, as I understood it, maybe I'm wrong, they're not relaxing it, they're just changing it, right? It's not like they're saying...
They're making it less restrictive than it currently is.
Okay.
You mean for second units? Is that what you're referring to specifically, or you're
No.
talking about design and new construction in general?
Multifamily, right?
Multifamily, which consists of 2 units. So you got primary house and your second unit. That's 2 units.
Okay, Sloan?
I mean, I think Jamie Rizzo is very persuasive, and Mohawk is, of course, the best street in the town. So I am persuaded that there's some validity to those points. I think we ought to think about, the complaints that we don't focus enough here in Corte Madera on the way things look. And I don't know how we solve that, but it's becoming a motif. Meeting after meeting, this issue is becoming an issue, and article after article. I don't know how we fix it. I don't know if we fix it at planning commission level. It's a public relations issue. Is it our fault or our problem or something? That's really the fundamental problem, which is, do we have a sufficient long-range plan, which not only for planning purposes, and by that I mean traffic and real property, land use, but also from a design aesthetic, have we thought through the future for our children and their children? But anyway, as to this specific thing, I'm persuaded, and I've always thought, in disagreement, frankly, with half of what Dick mentioned in his article, it's useful to give a good planning commission as much discretion as possible to try to implement what makes the most practical and aesthetic sense under the circumstances, that fits the neighborhood and benefits the community and so on and so forth. And I suppose he correctly points out, allowing that discretion also provides a road by which not so good design aesthetic can be implemented. I'm only spotting issues, as they would say in first year law school. I don't have the solution. The question before us is whether or not we are willing to provide some greater flexibility in those who want to expand, for example, first stories in some way. And I guess I'm in favor of that.
Thank you.
Okay. Having read this before the meeting tonight, I was just concerned because I'd remembered different homes that had been expanded in the Oakdale area, and neighbors were so concerned that houses were being built right in their own backyard, and then to see this, whether you want to say relaxed or expanded or giving more options, it was of concern to me. And I have a quick question to Doug or to Adam, because I read it, but now I can't remember what I read. How many variances were granted for expanding the floor area ratio?
Floor area ratio?
Both floor area ratio and lot coverage.
Okay, so I think lot coverage, we said about, I think it's at least 13 in the last 10 years. Is that right?
10
Doug?
years?
And then I think it's probably more than that, frankly, though. And floor area ratio, I've yet to see one.
Okay.
In my experience.
So when we're
And
talking
looking through
about,
files and stuff, yeah.
1.3 variances a year, I don't think that that is so onerous.
Could I speak to your question as well?
Yes.
So while the variances were one of the reasons for kind of beginning this process of exploring the standard, it's only one of multiple reasons why this would be of benefit. I think, as we've heard from some of the speakers and as staff has spoken to and the planning commissioners have spoken to as well, really the flexibility that it provides. I mean, variances are a number that we can kind of point to with specific cases, but I can just say in my own experience working with people at the counter who are coming in on a daily basis, people are looking at projects and looking at what options are available to them. I can say just from my own experience that this would be of significant benefit to provide that flexibility, to provide more options both to the applicants, prospective applicants, and to the Planning Commission in considering, the breadth of possibility that may be most desired by an applicant and most beneficial for the surrounding neighborhood in terms of potential impacts. So I understand the focus on variances, and it is something that we speak to in the staff report, and it is one of the reasons we looked into this. But in the exploration of this, it's really been maybe even overshadowed by the clear benefit of providing this flexibility to property owners.
Thanks, Doug. But it is still a limit that is not by right. It's just something to work with, but it's not automatically granted.
Correct. And even in terms of, if you look at the wording for floor area, which is not under consideration tonight, but even that speaks specifically to that point where it says that the maximum shall be determined as appropriate, through the design review process. So it specifically calls that out and says, this is going to go through a discretionary process where it will be determined based on numerous factors whether it's appropriate. It may be reduced through that process. So the same as the floor area may be reduced through that discretionary process, lot coverage may be as well. Where someone can, as Phyllis, I believe, mentioned, someone can say, yes, I meet all of the numbers, but that does not mean that will necessarily get approved or that it's the most appropriate given the situation. So.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for you, Doug, and Adam, if you maybe want to pipe in too, go for it. Of those 13 variances approximately that were awarded over the last, 10 years? Do you feel that those were good illustrations of why this flexibility is important to offer to our homeowners?
Yeah, and I think it's also proven by the fact that they were all granted and approved and accepted as part of not only, usually the variance goes through with the design review as well. So it's not that they oftentimes when you get a lot coverage variance, it will be grouped together with the design review application as well. So those have been approved. But yes, and I think to Doug's point, it also speaks to those that have been dissuaded from doing something before they even get to a variance level. And I'll just say, I think this is one of the things that we've heard time and again, how come we're not doing it? Do something for the residents and the homeowners and instead of the big developers coming in, we get that critique sometimes. And it's like, this is something through our experience we feel will benefit people. We've heard people who have accessibility issues. They don't want to go up. They want a first floor that just allows people, to be easier mobility to the back of the house. Things like that, where they're constrained and would otherwise have to go through not only the cost and expense, but the time of a variance in a planning application, I think.
Second units also? Would this make it a little bit easier for us to encourage second units to help meet our RENA numbers? Because, we're always concerned about how we're going to meet our RENA, and I'd rather have it through second units than new apartment buildings.
I think the flexibility it offers would be realized in any number of situations, whether that's adding an addition for your own family, or adding an addition to create more space to house someone else.
Thank you. Okay, the reason I asked if those 13 variances were provided examples of how some flexibility might be helpful is because I'm not an expert in this. I trust that the Planning Commission, and I read the minutes, put a lot of thought into this. I know planning staff has put a lot of thought into this. I appreciated your diagrams, Doug. That really was very helpful for me to visualize kind of why, with the different lot shapes, sometimes it's important. I would love to see some more examples, some real-world examples, and I hate to kind of throw this back at you, but I might ask that you take like every other of those 13, if you put them in chronological order, just a random sample of, say, 6 of them, and just off the top of my head, I'm just saying every other, because that seems to work numerically. And just give us a brief overview of why that variance made sense. Maybe just a diagram, or something from Marin Maps showing the lot shape, the building footprint, and why that made sense.
I'd just like to, if I may.
Absolutely.
I'd just like to point out the section of the staff report that speaks about the problem with issuing variances and some of the issues that we've seen in the past, and trying to move beyond that and maybe interrupt that process from what has happened in the past versus what we'd like to see in the future, which is to not provide exceptions, but instead to strengthen the standards, because issuing variances really undermines the legitimacy of the code. And I've seen, there are situations where it's pretty clear, or one may say that the variance process was used as a avenue to evaluate a case by case, where there may not have been a clear uniqueness of the lot, or the uniqueness of the lot as specified in the staff report was the substandard size. But when you look at the number of substandard, so-called substandard lots, there's so many of them that it's very clear that is not a unique condition. And so that is part of the problem that we've seen in the distant past of issuing variances based on that.
Well, I'll tell you
So-
this. Might I suggest you just give us a few real-world examples, doesn't have to be 6, then find 4 that illustrate why flexibility would be beneficial. And, I mean, don't write this in pen yet, because I don't
Okay.
yet have the support of my fellow council members. But I feel like I would like a little bit more information about this, and why those specific examples offered flexibility that was maybe helpful for both the neighbors and the homeowner, for whatever reason.
I would feel good about that.
Would you like
Or
that?
just continue to another?
Yeah.
Is that going to screw us up in some way? No?
No,
Okay.
no, not from an ordinance
Okay,
perspective.
what do you, Bob, what do you think?
Sure.
Okay, Jim?
I agree, but also I'd like you to think about if there's any other objective standards that we can introduce into the mix that would help with the trade-off, because, as I said, I'm concerned that with the way things are evolving in Sacramento, the Planning Commission's not going to be making the decision. It'll be you, and you'll have to use objective standards, whatever those are.
I think, just to respond to that, my concern with that is, I mean, one of the reasons why we picked lot coverage was it was a very finite, defined thing to target without getting into all sorts of other development standards, which will expand the scope tremendously of, I think, not only the work by staff to analyze how what the impacts might be, unintended consequences, going back to the Planning Commission a couple of times. I think we've really tried to narrowly tailor this to a very definitive development standard that should be changed when provided all the reasons why we think it will be beneficial. I understand the concern about potentially taking away some discretion from perhaps the commission. I think we probably have maybe more significant things, if that's the real concern, to think through. But I'd like to try to get this one through as quickly as possible. So.
Okay, thank you. One last comment that I had, and that's getting back to Sloan's comments about good design. Think about how we can address that. I appreciate what Peter and Phyllis have worked on. Let's try to figure out how we can move forward on that. Anyway, okay. Thank you. It is, yeah. So, I would entertain a motion to continue this item.
I'll move to continue.
Continue. Second.
No.
It's not
Oh.
doing anything.
Yeah.
Aren't doing
We'll
anything.
continue, it's good.
Yeah, we're continuing.
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon?
Yes.
Mayor First?
Yes. Thank you all. Business item 7.1. Todd, would you like to speak to this item? You had requested that we remove this item, or?
I'm glad I did that in advance. Yes, so Madam Mayor, members of the council, I'm asking to continue this item. Staff is working with the neighbors, and we believe we can come to a resolution. If we can't, we'll come back to the council at a later date.
Any public comment? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to
So
continue
moved.
this.
Second?
You think we should do that for the next one too, Diane?
Councilmember
Development
Andrews?
agreement, should we continue that one too? No.
One at a time. I'm sorry?
Madam Mayor, Jim has
calling a vote.
I know, go
Councilmember
ahead, I'm
Andrews
sorry.
has-
Sorry.
What?
I was just wondering about Peter's Red Line.
That's a different,
Okay.
yeah, it's farther down the street.
Okay.
We'll continue.
Are you going to vote?
Councilmember Andrews?
Yes, I guess.
Councilmember Bailey?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon?
Yes.
Mayor First?
Yes. All right. Item 7.2, Consideration and possible action to approve Resolution 24/2017, establishing procedures and requirements for processing and consideration of development agreements. It is 11:15. Too late to discuss this? Should we continue it? We're creating
You're creating a
brutal
log jam as we
future
go forward, and
agenda.
we pushed this thing 4 times, and I recommend you don't
okay.
push anything else back.
Okay, so we've got this item, we've got
I'll
the
remember this,
agenda,
Bob.
and we've got the minutes. Can we manage this item?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
I'll try to be brief. You have before you an item for consideration and possible action to approve Resolution 24/2017, establishing procedures and requirements for processing and consideration of development agreements. As expressed or explained in the staff report, Government Code, Section 65865, Paragraph C, requires that when an applicant for a development project makes a request for a development agreement, the city must establish procedures and requirements for the consideration of a development agreement application. So what you have before you in the resolution, this may be done by resolution or ordinance. In this case, it's being proposed to be done as a resolution, are procedures to process development agreement application. The town at this point does not have such procedures codified either in an ordinance or by resolution. So obviously, that's why this is being put forth this evening. The procedures in the resolution lay out sort of just the application process, what needs to be submitted, what needs to be in the application. A lot of this is taken really from the, straight from the the government code. And the process as well is taken from there as well. So I think just to provide some of the background, this is in late 2016, the town did receive a request from Mace Rich, the owners of the center parcel at the village of Corte Madera, with a request to enter into negotiations for the development agreement with the town for the use of the adjacent 5.4 acre gravel lot. And that's really part of the impetus here with their request to now go ahead and develop the procedures and process for such an application. It does not in any way have anything, this sort of sets up procedures and the process for any development agreement. It's not specific to any particular development agreement. And in no way provides any, I should say, decision on a proposed development agreement that would be forthcoming with the Restoration Hardware, Mace Rich Restoration Hardware application. So just, I'll leave it at that and see if you have any questions. I hope I covered
Questions?
everything that needs to
I
be.
do. So the part I didn't understand was, Adam, it says, so we have other development agreements in the town or something? I mean, I didn't understand, this is,
No, we don't at this point, to my understanding. We don't have, the town has not entered into development agreements with developers or other property owners
So-
at this point.
so when you say these procedures are consistent with the requirements for other development applications, what does that mean?
So that means that we have other land use applications. Essentially, they will travel along with other planning applications, whether land use entitlement applications. And so it's consistent with sort of the application, not only requirements, that we would set up a form, a checklist saying, here's what you, downstairs, somebody comes in and say, we want to apply for a development agreement. We'd give them that information, checklist, so forth. And it would travel along with any sort of entitlement application that they would have. It would go to the planning commission and then go on to the council as well. It's ultimately a council decision. So that's, I think that's what we were trying to communicate there, was that the process is consistent with other land use entitlements.
I'm sorry, can I ask more questions? I'm okay with it. I mean, sounded so vague to me that it's going to depend on something that will come before the council before anything gets approved, but I don't understand, is this like a new law or something? Surely we've had significant enough developments in the town that we've never had to confront this issue before? I mean, how about when the shopping centers were first built?
I don't know, but no, they were, I don't know if the law was passed post shopping centers being built or if it was before, but to my knowledge, those weren't any sort of negotiations that happened through that were not done via development agreement.
When I read through the agreement, it sounds extremely similar to your staff reports. Like, it's essentially, have you done this, that, and the other thing, and CEQA and all that.
Right.
So all this is requiring, on an annual basis, somebody who wants to, a commercial development primarily, I would think, right? They have to comply with these essentially disclosure requirements? Is that what it is? Or
On an annual basis.
yeah, it says
There's a monitoring that they are complying with whatever, I mean, so the application, I mean, I don't think we know, this is setting up the process, but presumably as part of the application, there would be terms of negotiated terms between the town and the applicant.
Oh, so it'll change on a project-by-project basis?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And those are monitored on a yearly basis.
Yeah, Diane, there's a whole section on annual review.
Well, right, but the development agreement shall be reviewed by the planning department.
That's for
but
the
it doesn't-
approval. Yeah.
For the approval, but you won't be going back to the entity with whom you've entered a development agreement to review that annually. That's what I was referring to. This is just an internal review.
That's right, that's planning department on a
Right.
yearly basis. We would make sure
Right.
that the terms of the agreement are being lived up to.
Got it.
But yearly.
Yes.
Right, but it's internal.
Yes.
It's not that the development agreements that we've entered into with an outside entity will be reviewed annually. It's
Well,
just-
but then we have a public hearing about it, noticed public hearing on the issue.
If there's a violation, isn't it?
If after the review,
Yes, if there's found
have
to
not
be-
complied,
yes,
then we do
then
it.
you
I
can bring
see.
it back and you can.
Okay.
The development agreements only cover town property or any sort of development that went on?
It could be any sort of development. There's no, I
Okay.
don't think it could, any private property, it could be.
All right,
Yeah.
so
But-
it's another tool you'll then have in your toolbox.
Exactly.
All right, any other questions? Any public comment?
Just make a comment sitting down. What they're doing is codifying practice.
No, Phyllis, you can't do that,
Codifying-
you gotta,
Right.
because they record it.
I'm closer. Peter Chase, this codifies the practice by which anyone would apply for a development so that they know what's coming and the town knows what's coming. And there's a process that says this is what you're going to have to do. And it's clear to everybody what the terms are, and that hasn't been the case until now. So it's not been put on paper and said, you have to do this, then that, and go through a specific set of milestones. That's what this does.
Actually, I have a question about that. I mean, are we anticipating that we'll be entering into development agreements in the normal course of our town business? Or is this something we foresee happening very rarely and under special circumstances, such as what we are experiencing with the potential agreement over the gravel lot should the
that's-
restoration hardware project go forward?
Yes, I think in practice, these are generally entered into on fairly major projects. And so I think it's going to be the latter of, and it's fairly unique circumstances would lead to something like this, so.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Mayor. There is an obligation on the part of the town to provide procedures if the town hasn't already adopted them whenever there is a request for a development agreement, and we have now received a request, so we do have an obligation as a town to adopt procedures since we don't already have them. The procedures before you are the recommendation of staff as to a set of procedures that you can adopt. And again, it's within your discretion to make changes to those, but you really do need to adopt some procedures in order to comply with the state law so that the development agreement that has been, now with a request has been made, that can then move forward through the procedure that you've adopted.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? See none. Close public comment?
I'll move to, unless there's more comments. If not, I'll move to adopt resolution number 24/2017, establishing procedures and requirements for processing and consideration of development agreements.
I'll second that.
Wait, before you do the vote, can I just say one thing? So this apparently went into statute, passed in 1965. Are you surprised, if I can ask, I guess, our town attorney, that in, 56 years or 58 years, we've never had anybody ask us for one of these?
It is unclear to me when the statutory requirement was adopted, so.
Looks like 1964.
In 1964.
65, sorry.
As someone coming to the town newly, it's difficult for me to say. Yes, it does surprise me, but I can't say it's implausible.
Okay.
Developments happen, but a development agreement is a specific, not all developments are done through a development agreement, and that's probably where the confusion lies. Yes, you certainly have had commercial development, but apparently it hasn't been done through a development agreement.
Okay, I'm sorry, it doesn't bother me, it just seems so random and
bothers you.
weird, right?
I can tell it bothers you.
Okay.
All right. We have a motion and a second.
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon.
Yes.
Mayor First.
Yes. Thank you. Got that one done. All right, moving on to review agenda item 7.3, review of draft August 1 Town Council agenda.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, we will have at least one addition and probably a few others, it sounds like. But one of the things we'll be coming back to you, our finance director, Daria, will be coming back with a recommendation to review and ask you to approve a new software budgeting system. Currently, we have in our equipment replacement fund $167,000 budgeted. We're going to ask for a budget appropriation of $90,000, but again, we'll justify that in the staff report. But it's become a necessary item, so we'll work on that. But that'll come back to you next council meeting, and then staff will work with Peter and Phyllis on the design review process, and if we're able to, through the mayor, we will look at the August 15th meeting potentially for that, if we can. But we will work on it, and I'll work through the mayor on that agenda item.
Okay. And then it sounds like we might have lot coverage and 141 Crescent.
We will spread those out over 2 council meetings and attempt to get out before 11. So we'll look at the agendas. We'll spread them out over the next 2 meetings.
Okay. Any other comments or changes? Any public comment? Okay. Let's move on to approval of the minutes of June 20th.
So moved.
Second?
Oh, we got to ask for public comment, sorry.
Any public comment? See none?
So moved.
Second?
Councilmember Andrews.
Yes.
Councilmember Bailey.
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Condon.
Yes.
Mayor First.
Yes. All right. And Sloan, as you had requested, I would like to adjourn in memory of Andy Verino.
Thank you, Mayor
Would
First.
you like to say a few words about Andy in addition to what you'd said earlier?
He'll be missed.
How long was he a member of the Lions Club?
He was 104 years old. He helped construct our community center.
In the 1950s?
He's the oldest president of a Lions Club in the history of the Lions worldwide when, at the age of 101, he was named president of our local Lions Club.
Very good.
I have 1,000 facts about Andy Vereno. It's good to have a 100-year-old friend. And I miss my time with him now, and I'm sorry he's gone.
All right.
I think we all know Andy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He sang at the Centennial, do you remember? At the New Year's Eve gala or whatever.
Makes
mean,
me wonder.
that's pretty
maybe
good.
he shouldn't have moved.
Anyway, thank you very much, Mayor First.
Thank you. All right, Andy, you'll be missed. Meeting adjourned.